You are not your emotions. Letting go without losing yourself. What if your anger isn't actually you? What if the fear, the shame, the sudden rush of sadness you feel in the middle of a conversation doesn't define you but just passes through? Everyone feels it. The flush of emotion that seems to hijack the moment. You say something you didn't mean. You isolate. You react. And afterward you feel the shame of being too much, or too cold, or not in control. But the Stoics had a different way of seeing it. They believed emotions weren't enemies, but they weren't your identity either. You are not your emotions. You are the space they move through. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But most of the time, it feels like the opposite. It feels like the outside world creates your emotions, and then you're trapped inside them. But feelings are like weather systems. They roll in. They can be heavy, loud, dramatic. But they're not permanent. The mistake is in thinking a passing storm is the sky itself. Emotions give signals, not commands. They carry messages, but they don't get to drive. The Stoics taught that between stimulus and response, there is a space, a moment of choice. That space is where strength lives. And when you believe every emotion must be obeyed, you lose that space. You lose the self. You begin to ride every high and crash with every low, as if those waves are who you are. But you are not the wave. You are the ocean it rises from. That doesn't mean numbing yourself. Stoicism isn't the absence of feeling. It's the ability to feel without being ruled. To acknowledge emotion without collapsing into it. To observe pain without becoming pain. It's about asking, what is this feeling trying to tell me? And what am I going to do with that information? You can feel rage without violence. You can feel sadness without drowning. You can feel fear and still move forward, because even the most intense emotion cannot strip you of your agency unless you hand it over. And the more you practice watching without attaching, the more you start to realize something profound. You can be calm even when you feel chaos, and that realization leads to something quieter, something deeper. Not a feeling, but a kind of stillness that doesn't leave you when the world starts to shake. Stillness in chaos. How to stay centered when everything's spinning. The world rarely quiets down. The noise comes from everywhere. Traffic, deadlines, arguments, news cycles, endless notifications. But the louder it gets out there, the more urgent it becomes to build quiet inside. Not the absence of sound, the presence of stillness. Stillness isn't something you find by escaping the world. It's something you carry into it. It's not about retreating into a cave or switching off your phone forever. It's about learning how to be unmoved in the middle of motion, like the eye of a storm, like a tree that doesn't flinch when the wind passes. The Stoics believed this kind of stillness was a form of mastery, not over others, but over yourself, over your reactions, over the urge to match chaos with chaos. Marcus Aurelius called it euthymia, a state of inner calm that comes from knowing where you stand and why. A confidence without noise, a clarity that doesn't need to shout. When someone criticizes you, when plans collapse, when uncertainty starts to rise like a tide, it's easy to be swept away, to lose yourself in trying to control what's uncontrollable. But stillness whispers something else. Hold your ground, step back, don't mistake movement for progress. Don't confuse noise for meaning. Stillness isn't passivity, it's presence. It's what allows you to respond rather than react, to choose rather than panic, to be clear when the world is cluttered. And it takes practice. Because chaos is persuasive. It tells you to fight back, to scream, to fix everything at once. It promises relief through action, even when that action is reckless. But the Stoics remind us there is power in staying anchored, in remembering that peace doesn't begin when the world stops moving. It begins when you stop needing it to. Because once you realize the storm is not yours to control, you can finally stop trying to steer the wind and start learning how to stand inside it. Unshaken, unrushed, still, not waiting for the noise to fade, but listening for the silence beneath it, until the next gust comes and you're still standing, because you weren't chasing calm, you were becoming it. And that shift prepares you for the next lesson. How to move forward without needing to control where everything lands. Letting go of outcomes, the freedom of releasing control. You plan carefully, you try your best, you do everything right. But the outcome doesn't match the effort. The promotion goes to someone else. The conversation doesn't land. The person you love walks away anyway. And you're left asking the same question over and over. What did I do wrong? The Stoics would offer a different question. What did you actually control? You can control your preparation, your honesty, your intention, but not the result, not the response, not the way the world unfolds after you've given your best. That's the radical core of Stoic peace, learning to release the outcome. It sounds passive, but it's the opposite. It's the discipline of focusing entirely on what's yours to manage and refusing to suffer over what isn't. Epictetus wrote, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." That single sentence is a key to emotional freedom. The more you tie your identity to results, the more fragile you become. If your worth depends on success, then failure becomes unbearable. If love must be returned to feel real, then rejection becomes annihilation. And when things go wrong, as they inevitably do, you're left believing the problem was you. But when you act from principle rather than attachment, something shifts. You start to measure yourself, not by what happens, but by how you showed up. Did you speak truthfully? Did you give your full effort? Did you act with courage, patience, integrity? Then you've already won. The outcome is noise. It's a shadow. It's never been in your hands. Letting go of outcomes doesn't mean not caring. It means caring enough to do your part and wise enough to stop grasping at the rest. Because once the arrow leaves your bow, it's no longer yours to steer. And the more you cling to where it lands, the more power you give to everything outside you. The opinions, the timing, the chaos. It doesn't mean you stop hoping, but it means you stop bargaining. You stop sacrificing your peace for a future you don't own. And strangely, that's when real freedom appears. Because when you release the need to win, to be praised, to have it go your way, you discover something strange. You feel lighter, stronger, clearer, not because you stopped trying, but because you remembered what was actually yours to hold, and what was never yours to begin with. That shift doesn't make you weaker. It makes you ready. Ready to finally focus on what's left. Not the outcome, but the only thing that's ever been in your control at all. What you can control, returning to the center of your power. There are two circles. One holds everything you can control. The other holds everything you can't. Most of your suffering comes from confusing the two. We spend hours replaying what someone else said, obsessing over the outcome, worrying about what might happen next, trying to shape the future with sheer force of thought. But the Stoics taught that real strength begins with a simpler act, distinguishing between what's yours and what isn't. Epictetus reminded us, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. The outside world is wild, unpredictable. People disappoint, circumstances shift, plans fall apart. But your thoughts, your actions, your perspective, those are yours. That's the ground you stand on. And once you realize that, everything changes. You stop wasting energy trying to manage what's unmanageable. You stop offering your peace to the behavior of strangers. You start focusing on your responses, your values, your choices, not because the world gets easier, but because your footing gets stronger. The Stoics didn't believe in control through dominance. They believed in self-command. They believed the only true freedom was inner freedom, because no one can take that from you. You don't control other people's opinions. You don't control the weather. You don't control timing, outcomes, or luck, but you do control how you meet the moment. You control whether you speak with honesty or venom. You control whether you live by fear or by principle. And in that space, in that sliver of choice, is your entire power. This doesn't mean detachment. It means focus. It means returning, again and again, to the circle that is yours, to the only place where you can actually move the needle, the only place where action becomes peace. And that shift, that refocusing, isn't a one-time thing. It's a practice, a returning, a recentering. Because the world will always try to pull you into what you can't control. It will tempt you to fix, to force, to fear. But the Stoics remind us what's outside of you is never fully yours, so turn inward. Not to retreat, but to rise. Not to escape, but to anchor. Because the more you know what's yours to hold, the more clearly you begin to see everything else for what it really is. And that clarity, that shift in how you see, is where the next lesson begins. The discipline of perception, seeing clearly when it matters most. Two people face the same event. One breaks, one bends. Why? The Stoics would say, it's not the event, it's the lens. Not what happens, but how you see it. Perception is everything. Not because it changes the facts, but because it changes your relationship to them. You can't stop the rain, but you can stop cursing the clouds. You can't avoid difficulty, but you can refuse to label it as ruin. Epictetus taught that men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. And this is where discipline begins. Not in the body, in the mind. Discipline of perception means stepping back before reacting, questioning the first story your emotions try to tell. It means seeing a delay as an opportunity, a betrayal as a lesson, a setback as a kind of strange, reluctant gift. You don't have to pretend things are good, but you do have to look for what can be gained. Not because you're naive, but because you're strong enough to look deeper. Sometimes we carry pain longer than we need to, not because of what happened, but because of how we framed it. Because we've repeated the same narrative until it hardened into truth. But perception can be softened, rewritten, freed. This doesn't mean forcing positivity. Stoicism isn't optimism. It's clarity. It's asking, what is the reality here? And what am I adding to it? Are you turning inconvenience into outrage? Disappointment into catastrophe? Fear into paralysis? Then the pain isn't just in the world, it's in the lens. And lenses can be changed. The Stoics practiced this daily. They imagined hardship before it arrived. They reframed failure as refinement. They believed nothing external had the power to make you miserable, unless you gave it permission. Even in grief, even in injustice, they searched for what could not be taken. Character, virtue, inner calm. They trained the mind to see not just what was lost, but what remained. Because once perception becomes a choice, even suffering begins to shift. You start to see the power you still have. The things no loss can touch. The part of you that remains steady, regardless of circumstance. That steadiness isn't indifference, it's strength. It's the clarity to say, this is hard, but I don't have to make it harder. And that clarity, that ability to hold your shape even in difficulty, prepares you for the next truth. That some things will hurt, but that doesn't mean you have to run from them. Enduring what you'd rather escape, finding strength through the fire. Some things we brace for, others take us by surprise. But either way, there are moments in life that hurt deeply, and all we want is for it to stop. The betrayal, the illness, the failure you didn't see coming, the quiet disappointments that stack up in silence, the ache of grief you thought you'd already survived. We try to distract, to numb, to rationalize our way out. But the Stoics taught something harder and more powerful. Stay. Stay with the discomfort. Don't run. Don't flinch. Endure it. Not as punishment, but as practice. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we are given a short life, but that we waste a lot of it. We waste it, in part, trying to escape the very moments that shape us." Endurance isn't about gritting your teeth. It's about softening into the moment without surrendering your integrity. It's holding your ground, not to win, but to witness your own resilience. Pain shows up as a test, not of how much you can take, but of how well you can stay connected to who you are while taking it. The Stoics believed that suffering was inevitable, but misery was optional. They didn't deny pain. They redefined it. They asked what it could teach, what it could burn away, what it could reveal about your character. You can't choose when hardship arrives, but you can choose who you become in response to it. That doesn't mean pretending to be strong. It means choosing to stay true through anger, through sorrow, through fear, without letting those emotions twist your nature. It's about choosing courage, not comfort, choosing clarity, not collapse, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. We think escaping pain will save us, but sometimes what saves us is staying with it long enough to learn what it has to show. Sometimes the fire doesn't burn you, it refines you. It forges the parts of you that softness never could. Each time you stay, each time you endure what you once thought would break you, you stretch, you expand, you discover a strength that doesn't scream or flex, but simply stays. It stays honest. It stays steady. It stays present. Because sometimes what you endure isn't the pain itself, but the need to escape it. And once that need dissolves, something strange begins to happen. You no longer need to hide. You no longer need to fear what's difficult. You stop asking, "When will this end?" and start asking, "What is this shaping in me?" You see clearly, maybe for the first time, what's real and what's just an opinion you inherited about what should hurt you at all. Opinion versus truth, separating what you feel from what is. Someone ignores your message. A stranger frowns at you. Plans change without warning. And without realizing it, your mind fills in the blanks. They're mad at me. I did something wrong. I'm being disrespected. But are you? Or is that just the story your mind rushed to write? The Stoics warned us, don't mistake opinion for truth. Most suffering isn't caused by events, it's caused by what we believe they mean. Epictetus wrote, "What really frightens and dismays us is not external events themselves, but the way in which we think about them." A delay isn't an insult. A no isn't a rejection of your worth. A failure isn't proof you're broken. Those are interpretations colored by memory, fear, ego, insecurity. The discipline lies in pausing long enough to ask, what do I actually know? What am I layering on top of this moment that might not be real? It's not about being indifferent. It's about being honest. It's about recognizing how quickly a glance becomes a threat, how silence becomes judgment, how one mistake becomes your entire identity. Your mind wants to explain everything. In its rush for certainty, it often trades truth for narrative. It offers something solid, even if it's heavy and false, because it feels safer than sitting with the unknown. And you carry it. You carry the assumptions, the imagined slights, the rehearsed offenses. Not because they're true, but because they're familiar, and familiarity often feels like safety. The Stoics invite us to slow that process down, to separate the raw event from the emotion layered on top, to test the stories, to challenge the voice that says, "They must hate me, I always fail, I'm not enough." Because beneath that voice is something steadier, a place where reality is just what's happening, not what it means about you, a place where you can respond rather than react. That doesn't mean emotion disappears, but it stops owning you. You begin to notice the difference between discomfort and danger, between uncertainty and actual threat. You begin to see when you're spinning stories out of fear instead of seeing clearly. And when you live from that place, something shifts. The need to defend relaxes. The urge to react slows down. The pressure to interpret everything loses its grip. You become quieter inside, more grounded, more present. In that clarity, you discover something the Stoics held sacred, the space between stimulus and response. The freedom to choose not what happens, but what meaning you allow to grow inside it. That space, once you find it and learn to return to it, becomes the foundation of something unshakable. Not because life stops challenging you, but because you've stopped mistaking every thought as truth. The Inner Citadel, building a fortress the world can't enter. There is a part of you no one can touch. Not with insult, not with praise, not with power or pain. The Stoics called it the Inner Citadel, a place of stillness and sovereignty inside you. You can lose your job, your reputation, your health, but if your inner citadel is strong, you won't lose yourself, because you've built something the outside world doesn't own. Marcus Aurelius spoke of retreating into this fortress not to escape life, but to re-enter it with clarity. It is a place to return to when the world pulls you in 1,000 directions, when you're asked to become someone you're not, or when pain comes faster than peace. It's not a denial of hardship. It's a decision about where you place your foundation. When the outer world trembles, the inner one must hold. That's what the citadel is for. The inner citadel is not armor. It doesn't harden you. It humbles you. It reminds you that your character is not dependent on circumstance. That no matter how loud things get, you don't have to become the noise. But it has to be built. And like any real structure, it requires daily work. Every time you respond with patience instead of impulse, you lay a stone. Every time you stay true to your values when no one's watching, you reinforce the walls. Every moment of restraint, of honesty, of quiet strength, you fortify what protects your peace. Even small decisions matter. Choosing to speak gently when anger rises, choosing to pause before reacting, choosing to stay when every part of you wants to run. These are the acts of building. You won't always feel it. Some days, the world will still breach your gates. But if you've done the work, if you've kept building even in silence, you'll find that part of you still standing, even after the wave. The citadel is not a place of isolation. It's where you remember who you are before the world told you who to be, where your principles live, where your truth waits. It's not about cutting yourself off. It's about creating a place to return to, so you're not constantly scattered by the world's demands. And when you return to it, you return stronger, clearer, untouched. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped letting it reach the part of you it could never truly touch. And once you know that place exists, you begin to protect it, not with walls, but with discipline, with intention, with the quiet daily choice to do what's difficult, not because it looks noble, but because it strengthens the part of you that nothing else can. Because someday, when everything else is stripped away, that part is what will remain. And it will remind you, you were never powerless. You just needed to remember where your power lives. The Art of Voluntary Discomfort, choosing hard things to strengthen what's soft. We are not wired to seek pain. We are wired to avoid it. And for most of history, that kept us alive. But comfort isn't always a gift. Sometimes it's a trap. And the Stoics knew it. They practiced what they called voluntary discomfort, sleeping without a blanket, skipping meals, imagining the worst so it would lose its sting. Not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they wanted to remember what they could survive. Seneca wrote, Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition I feared?" The point wasn't to become cold or detached, it was to become capable, to remind yourself that you are not as fragile as comfort makes you feel. Voluntary discomfort isn't about punishment. It's preparation. It builds resilience on your terms before the world forces it on you. It's a rehearsal for chaos, a strengthening of the will, a quiet refusal to let softness erode your edge. Because when life turns hard, you don't want to meet it as a stranger. You want to greet it like an old acquaintance, someone you've trained beside, someone who's tested you before. And that testing builds not just strength, but confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet knowing that you won't shatter when conditions change, that you've practiced discomfort not to suffer but to stretch. That doesn't mean abandoning joy or beauty or rest. It means not worshiping them. It means learning to hold them lightly, knowing you could let them go without letting yourself go with them. Because if comfort becomes your only measure of happiness, you've built your life on a fragile foundation. Every time you step into something uncomfortable, waking early, speaking honestly, embracing silence, delaying gratification, you practice this art. You signal to yourself, "I can do hard things. I can withstand what I fear. I don't need to run from effort to be free." And each time you do, you discover that strength was never found in avoiding the fire. It was found in walking through it on purpose. You discover you're not just a body that craves ease, you are a will that grows stronger through tension, so that when life stops asking and starts demanding, your answer is already waiting, not with ease, but with steadiness. And it's that steadiness you'll need when you confront not just personal pain, but the pain of a world that doesn't always play fair. And when you meet that world with the strength you've rehearsed in silence, you realize discomfort was never the enemy. It was the training ground for everything you're about to face. Holding peace in an unjust world, refusing to break when the world does. The world isn't fair. It never was. Good people suffer. Corrupt ones rise. Kindness is mistaken for weakness, and cruelty sometimes wins. And if you wait for justice to find peace, you might never find it at all. The Stoics understood this. They lived under tyrants, walked through plagues, watched friends be exiled or executed. And still, they wrote about virtue, about calm, about the strength to stay whole in a broken world. Because if your peace depends on the world being fair, then your peace is always at risk. But if your peace comes from how you choose to live, how you act, what you stand for, who you refuse to become, then injustice can touch everything except your soul. Epictetus was born a slave. He lost his freedom, his comfort, his security, but he said no man is free who is not master of himself. He found peace not by waiting for fairness, but by mastering his own mind. Stoicism doesn't teach you to ignore injustice. It teaches you to resist becoming like it, to respond with clarity, not chaos, to hold your values even when no one else does, to protect your integrity even when the world forgets what that word means. You can care deeply and still stay steady. You can fight for what's right without becoming consumed by hate. You can grieve what's broken without becoming bitter, because your power lies in how you carry yourself through it. That doesn't mean apathy. It means anchoring. It means doing what you can, where you are, with what you have, without losing who you are. It means understanding that while you may not control the outcomes, you always control the inputs. You can't make the world just, but you can be just within it. You can't erase cruelty, but you can't refuse to contribute to it. You can't promise that the truth will win, but you can live like it still matters. Even when justice fails, you don't have to. Even when the system breaks down, your principles don't have to break with it. You are not the sum of the world's failures. You are the sum of how you choose to show up in the face of them. And when you do, something remarkable happens. You stop waiting for the world to make you feel safe. You start becoming someone who's safe in the world, not because it's easy, but because peace isn't something you find. It's something you build. And what you build from the inside, no injustice can take away. Even in the darkest hour, that light still burns, and it reminds you that your response is always yours to shape. You are not your reputation, letting go of the world's reflection. Your reputation is not who you are. It's a reflection shaped by fragments of what others see, filtered through their fears, expectations, and projections, sometimes accurate, often not. And yet, we chase it, we protect it, we lose sleep over it, we build our lives around what others might think, polishing our image until it becomes more important than our essence. But the Stoics warned us, reputation is external, it's not in your control. What is in your control is your character. Epictetus reminded his students, if you wish to be good, begin by believing that you are wicked. He meant that improvement starts with looking inward, not outward. That peace comes from who you are in private, not who people think you are in public. Reputation is a shadow. It changes depending on the light. One day you're praised. The next you're questioned. One group may admire you, another may despise you for the same action. And if your worth rises and falls with public opinion, you'll never feel whole. You'll become a mirror, always reflecting, never becoming. Character is what you carry when no one's watching. It's what you do when there's nothing to gain. It's the inner alignment between what you believe and how you act, even when it costs you. There is a quiet power in not needing to be seen, a strength in choosing what's right over what's popular. The Stoics didn't seek applause, they sought harmony between word and deed. The world will never agree on who you are, but you can decide. That decision comes with clarity, with boundaries, with the courage to be misunderstood. Not everyone will like you. Not everyone needs to. Reputation lives in the minds of others, changing, distorting, reacting to things you cannot control. Because your job isn't to manage perception, it's to live in truth. When you choose integrity over image, you may lose applause, but you keep your peace. When you let go of performing for approval, you begin to act from principle, and that shift is where freedom begins. You can walk away from gossip without chasing it down. You can act with kindness without demanding recognition. You can do what's right and let silence carry the proof. So let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them fill in the blanks. You don't have to answer to rumors. You answer to your values, because the version of you that exists in their minds isn't your responsibility. But the person you become in your own eyes, that's the one you live with, and that's the one that matters. Especially when you learn to live not for praise, but for principle. Living by principles, not praise, the quiet path to inner stability. Praise feels good. Recognition lights something up in us. Approval makes the world feel safer, but when it becomes the reason you act, it becomes the reason you suffer. The Stoics believed that living well meant living by principle, not by popularity, because popularity is unstable. What earns applause today may be condemned tomorrow. What wins the crowd may cost your integrity. Principles don't move like that. They don't chase trends. They don't shift when someone frowns. They anchor you. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. And craving praise is a kind of poverty, one that leaves you starving for affirmation and empty when it doesn't arrive." But when you act from principle, something changes. You begin to do what's right because it's right. You begin to let go of needing an audience. Living by principle means choosing honesty even when a lie would gain favor. It means holding to your values when bending them would win you more applause. It means walking alone when the crowd moves the other way. And that can feel lonely. at first. But slowly you begin to feel something stronger than approval. You begin to feel peace, the kind that doesn't vanish when you're misunderstood, the kind that grows quietly in the absence of noise. Praise fades, applause stops, trends shift. But principles, they stay. They outlast the moment. They remain when no one's looking. And when everything outside feels uncertain, they become the solid ground you walk on. This doesn't mean closing yourself off to feedback. It doesn't mean rejecting every compliment. But it means no longer needing them to feel whole. It means learning to live from the inside out, not the outside in. You'll be tempted to compromise, to soften your truth for applause, to shift your values just enough to be liked. But that path always takes more than it gives. The Stoics knew that living by principle is harder at first, but it becomes easier with time, because while praise is momentary, integrity builds. It accumulates. It strengthens something in you that doesn't depend on noise. And when you live from that place, you start to see life differently. Decisions become clearer. Relationships become simpler. The weight of trying to impress disappears. You don't need to prove. You just need to act. And in that act, quiet, steady, often unseen, you become someone worth trusting, especially to yourself. Because when you no longer live for praise, you start discovering what truly matters to you. Not what's loud, not what's shiny, but what holds. And learning to find that is where we go next. How to know what you truly value. Listening for what doesn't fade. Most people don't know what they truly value. They know what they've been told to want, what their parents admired, what their peers praise, what culture calls success. But values, real values, aren't inherited. They're uncovered. And often they're uncovered slowly. The Stoics believed that clarity begins not by challenging the world, but by questioning yourself. What makes you feel at peace, not distracted, not entertained, but grounded? What actions leave you proud, not because someone applauded, but because they aligned with who you're trying to be? What qualities do you admire in others that you quietly wish you could live up to? The answers aren't far, but they're buried, beneath the noise of status, beneath the pressure to perform, beneath the temptation to fit a mold that doesn't quite feel like yours. To know what you value, look at where you hurt. Where do you feel something's missing? Where do you feel betrayed by others or by yourself? If falsehood wounds you, perhaps you crave truth. If indifference stings, perhaps you value care. If waste bothers you, maybe simplicity is quietly sacred to you. Values don't just live in beauty, they live in pain. They live in envy, in awe, in regret. They live in the books you underline, the moments you revisit, the people you remember long after they're gone. And once you begin to name them, even imperfectly, you start to see your life with new eyes. You understand why some jobs drained you, why some relationships shrank you, why some choices felt so empty even when they were praised. Without clear values, life is fast and directionless. You become reactive. You chase what glitters. You explain yourself to people who don't care. And eventually, you begin to forget who you were before the applause and the expectations. But when you know what matters, even a little, something shifts. You become slower to bend, quicker to notice misalignment, less afraid of being misunderstood, and more afraid of misunderstanding yourself. The Stoics knew that peace doesn't come from achievement. It comes from congruence. When your life starts to match your truth, when your choices reflect your center. That's how you know it's real. It holds when life unravels. It feels weightier than attention and quieter than anxiety. It feels like something that's always been waiting for you. And once you find it, the question becomes simple. Are you ready to stop performing a self and start becoming one? The trap of self-image. when the mask becomes the mirror. There's the person you are, and then there's the person you think you're supposed to be. At first, the difference is small. A word you hold back, a smile you fake, a truth you soften, but over time it grows. And if you're not careful, the performance becomes the personality, the act becomes the identity, and slowly, the line between the real you and the presented you begins to blur. The Stoics warned us about attachments to illusions, especially the illusion of self. They believed identity should be rooted in character, not in image. But image is tempting, because it's rewarded, because it gives us something to control, because it gives the world something to like. But image is fragile. It's shaped by attention. It demands constant upkeep. It feeds on compliments and withers in silence. And when you tie your self-worth to how you appear, you never really rest. You begin to protect the mask, not the soul beneath it. You second-guess your instincts. You become cautious with your words, strategic with your emotions. You edit your life to stay palatable, even when it means distorting your truth. You start living as a version of yourself, one that's optimized for approval but disconnected from depth. At first, it feels like control. Eventually, it becomes captivity, because the image you work so hard to perfect will never love you back. It will only ask for more polish, more consistency, more restraint. And the moment you slip, even a little, it reminds you that its affection was conditional all along. The Stoics taught that peace doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being real, from being able to look in the mirror without pretending, from being able to speak without rehearsing, from being able to live without explaining. To escape the trap of self-image, you must risk something harder than rejection. You must risk being known, fully, imperfectly, without the armor of performance. That means showing up without the filter. It means letting the edges of who you are be visible, even when they're not smooth. It means trusting that dignity isn't found in polish, but in principle. When you begin to let go of managing perception, you discover something strange. You start to breathe differently. You stop monitoring every move. You stop needing applause to feel real. You begin to speak from the inside, not to win, but simply to connect. Your self-image might win you admiration, but only your character will give you rest. And rest is what you need if you want to go deeper, if you want to meet the person you've been avoiding, not the one you perform, but the one you've been all along. That part of you, the unedited, unvarnished self, is where the next chapter begins, and it's the only place worth starting from. Accepting who you've been, making peace with the person behind you. Before you become who you want to be, you have to face who you were. The version of you that hurt people, that avoided hard things, that clung to approval, that settled for less, not because you didn't care, but because you didn't know how to ask for more. The version that stayed quiet when you should have spoken, that pretended to be fine when you weren't, that kept shrinking just to fit in. We're taught to look forward, to chase growth, to focus on the next version of ourselves. But the Stoics knew you cannot move forward without first turning around. Seneca wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And nowhere is this more true than when we revisit our past selves. We fear what we'll find. We fear the weight of regret. We fear facing the moments we would rather forget." But you can't hate yourself into wholeness. You can't reject the past without rejecting the foundation that growth stands on. The old version of you may not deserve applause, but they do deserve understanding, because they were doing the best they could with what they had. They were surviving. They were learning. They were trying, even if the result was messy. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It means honesty. It means saying, "Yes, that was me," and still choosing to move forward. It means recognizing that the mistakes you made were part of the climb, not a disqualification from reaching higher ground. When you stop defending or denying who you've been, you create space for something else. You create space for responsibility, for ownership, for compassion. Not excuses, but context. And that space is what allows real growth to begin. You begin to understand the choices you made when you were tired, scared, or lost. You begin to offer the same grace you so easily give to others. You begin to understand that becoming someone better doesn't mean erasing who you were. It means carrying their lessons with humility. The Stoics didn't idealize perfection. They practiced self-examination. They returned to themselves daily, not to shame who they'd been, but to better understand where they were going. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." But even in that pursuit, he didn't pretend to be flawless. He worked with what was true. You don't need to rewrite your story. You need to face it without flinching. You need to meet your reflection without judgment and ask what it still has to teach you. Because the person you're becoming isn't built on who you pretend to be. They're built on the one who finally decided to tell the truth about where they began. And that honesty, that grounding, is what prepares you for something much harder, becoming who you say you are. Becoming who you say you are, turning aspiration into alignment. It's easy to describe the person you want to be. It's harder to live like them when no one's watching. The Stoics believed that virtue wasn't just a concept, it was a practice. They didn't measure goodness by how it sounded. They measured it by how it held up under pressure, how it translated into choices, how it guided action when applause was absent. You can write beautiful words. You can craft the right identity. You can speak of patience, discipline, and courage. But when the moment comes, when things go sideways, when your ego's on fire, when no one would blame you for reacting, what do you choose then? That's the test. Not what you say, but what you do when saying nothing would be easier. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." It wasn't a call to fantasy. It was a reminder that identity begins with decision, and decision means nothing without follow-through. Becoming who you say you are means returning to your principles, especially when they're inconvenient. It means choosing honesty when it might cost you. It means offering kindness when it's not returned. It means staying steady when every part of you wants to flinch. It also means confronting your own contradictions. The moments when your actions fall short of your values. The times you catch yourself justifying what you know isn't aligned. Becoming isn't a straight path. It's a series of recalibrations, and every honest course correction is a step forward. You'll be tempted to compromise, to explain, to act from fear. But each time you choose to act from principle instead, you reinforce a deeper kind of strength, one that doesn't depend on the situation going your way. It's not glamorous. It's not always recognized. But that's the point. The most meaningful transformations happen without an audience. They happen in private decisions, in quiet acts of integrity, in the moments where no one is keeping score. You become who you say you are when you stop treating your values like ideals and start treating them like obligations. Not burdens, but standards, a quiet vow you make to yourself each day. And the more often you choose them, the more real they become. Not because you said them out loud, but because you made them visible through your choices. This is the beginning of alignment, of walking in rhythm with your own convictions, of trusting that the most powerful identity is the one you earn, not with words but with repetition. And it's what lays the foundation for the next challenge, living with integrity, especially in the moments no one else sees. Integrity in the unseen moments. Who you are when no one's watching. Character is not built in public, it's revealed there. But it's built in silence, in the decisions that leave no trace, in the choices that benefit no one but your conscience. The Stoics taught that virtue is its own reward, that you don't act justly for applause. You act justly because justice is who you've chosen to be. Epictetus wrote, "Never depend on the admiration of others. There is no strength in it." Personal merit cannot be derived from an external source. And what greater test of merit than the moments that offer no credit at all? It's easy to do the right thing when someone's watching. It's much harder when there's nothing to gain, no recognition, no praise, no witness to record your virtue, no metrics, no spotlight, no validation, just a decision between what's easy and what's right. But that's where it counts most, not because it's seen, but because it shapes the only part of you that's truly yours, the part you carry everywhere, the part that speaks to you in the quiet, the part that feels either steady or ashamed when you're alone. Integrity means returning a wallet when no one saw you pick it up. It means keeping a promise even when it's no longer convenient. It means telling the truth, not for applause, but because lies chip away at your sense of self. It means walking away from gossip, even when it would win you favor. It means honoring commitments when no one is following up. It means giving credit when it would be easier to keep it for yourself. These aren't grand gestures, they're subtle ones. But in the Stoic view, these small, invisible moments are the architecture of character. They are the quiet bricks of who you become. Not through words, but through practice. Not once, but repeatedly. And you'll know when they're working, not because life gets easier, but because you begin to feel aligned, even in difficulty, because you no longer wonder who you are. You've shown yourself. You've seen who you become when no one's checking. No performance, no spotlight, just action. Quiet, intentional, unshakable action. And over time, that inner steadiness builds something no status can buy. Self-trust, not the kind that boasts, but the kind that holds. The kind that steadies you when chaos comes. The kind that whispers, you've already chosen who to be. And that's the kind you'll need when the next challenge appears. Not a public test, but a private one. Who you are, regardless of what happens around you. Who you are versus what happens to you. Protecting the self from circumstance. There's a difference between your story and your identity. Your story includes the losses, the betrayals, the moments that bent you without breaking you. It includes the things you never asked for, and the pain you had no say in. It contains the failures, the unexpected changes, the injustices that knocked the wind out of you. But your identity, yourself, is something else entirely. The Stoics taught that the core of who you are must remain untouchable. That circumstances may shape your path, but they don't get to define your character unless you let them. Life will bring you what it brings. But how much of that you absorb into your sense of self, that's the part that's up to you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." At first, that sounds impossible, but it's not about pretending bad things don't happen. It's about choosing how much of yourself you hand over to them. It's about drawing a line between what happened to you and what you choose to become. Because of it, you can lose a job without losing your dignity. You can be rejected without becoming unworthy. You can be insulted without taking the insult into your bloodstream. You can face deep suffering without letting it rewrite the story of your worth. Pain changes us, but so does perspective. And perspective is a choice, one you make not just once, but again and again, especially when it's hardest, especially when bitterness feels justified, especially when you want the world to know you've been hurt. The Stoics didn't deny emotion, they just refused to let it dictate identity. They knew the danger of becoming so fused with your misfortunes that you begin to think they are you. But you are not your trauma. You are not your failure. You are not your worst moment repeated back to you in memory. Who you are isn't what's been done to you. It's how you respond to it. It's the distance between the event and the meaning you give it. And that gap, the Stoics believed, is where freedom lives. To live well is not to avoid hardship. It's to remain yourself within it. It's to let difficulty refine you, but not define you. It's to meet each blow with clarity, to look at it and say, this changes my path, not my core. Because when you learn to separate identity from outcome, from praise, from success, from misfortune, you become something steadier, something harder to shake, something less afraid of what the world might throw next. You stop being defined by the storm and start being remembered for how you stood inside it. And that shift prepares you for the next lesson, that not everyone will understand the strength it takes to do that, and you don't need them to. Stop needing to be understood, letting go of the hunger for approval. You explain yourself, you clarify your tone, you soften your truth so it lands just right, and still someone misreads you. Someone questions your motives. Someone fills in the gaps with their own assumptions, and it stings. Because part of us believes that if we're kind enough, thoughtful enough, clear enough, we'll finally be seen as we are. But the Stoics knew better. They knew that needing to be understood is a kind of captivity. Epictetus wrote, "If you seek truth, you will not seek victory by dishonorable means." He didn't say manipulate perception. He didn't say win arguments. He said stay aligned with what's true, regardless of who understands it. Because your worth isn't dependent on being fully known. It's measured in your actions, not in how they're received. You will be misinterpreted. You will be disliked. You will be judged by people who've never met you, and people who never really tried to. You will be filtered through insecurities that aren't yours, seen through biases you didn't earn, and misunderstood by those who aren't ready to understand. And you can spend your energy chasing their approval, or you can live from your principles and let your life be your answer. Needing to be understood is the ego's way of asking for safety. It's the belief that if others see us clearly, they won't hurt us. But the Stoics knew peace comes from accepting that you may never be fully understood and choosing to be at peace anyway. Not because you don't care, but because you've learned what's truly yours to control. And someone else's perception never was. Let people misunderstand. Let them create their versions of you. That's their lens, not your identity. Their assumptions don't shape your character. Their doubt doesn't erase your clarity. When you stop needing everyone to get it, you make space for something else. You make space for integrity, for stillness, for a life that doesn't explain itself. It just reflects the values it's built on. You begin to speak less, but mean more. You begin to act more and explain less. You start living with an inner orientation, anchored not in being admired, but in being aligned. And when you live that way long enough, you realize understanding is nice, but it's not necessary, because your truth isn't weakened by someone else's confusion. It only grows stronger in your decision to live it anyway, even when no one else sees it clearly, especially then. And when that becomes enough, you're ready to embrace something quieter, something deeper, your place in the vastness of it all. You are a moment in time, embracing the temporary to live more fully. You are not the center of the universe, but you are part of it. A brief flicker, a breath between eternities, a single note in a song that began long before you and will continue long after. To the Stoics, this wasn't depressing. It was clarifying. They believed that remembering your smallness was the key to living wisely. Not because you don't matter, but because knowing your impermanence helps you see what does. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Soon you will have forgotten all things. Soon all things will have forgotten you." He didn't mean it as despair. He meant it as freedom. Freedom from the need to impress. Freedom from the illusion of permanence. Freedom from thinking everything you do has to be remembered to be meaningful. When you realize you are a moment in time, you stop chasing legacy and start living with presence. You let go of trying to control how you'll be remembered and focus instead on how you show up now. You begin to treasure the fleeting. You notice the taste of food, the sound of laughter, the way the sunlight falls through a window. You start giving your full attention to what you'd normally rush past. And strangely, by doing that, you live more deeply. You stop taking things for granted, not out of fear but out of reverence. You begin to hold people more gently, speak more honestly, waste less time on appearances, and more time on essence. Because the truth is, everything changes. Everything ends. And when you can look that truth in the eye without flinching, you begin to live in a way that doesn't resist time, but moves in harmony with it. Not hurried, not grasping, just awake. You won't be here forever, and that's not a tragedy. It's a compass, a reminder to live like your moments matter, because they do, and that includes the difficult ones, especially the ones that ask more from you than you want to give. Which brings us to the next lesson, what it means to welcome hardship, not as punishment, but as part of the path. Welcome hardship. Let difficulty become your teacher. You don't have to go looking for pain. It will find you in missed opportunities, in unexpected endings, in the quiet weight of days that don't go your way. The Stoics never asked you to enjoy suffering, but they did challenge you to greet it differently, not with bitterness, but with curiosity. Epictetus said, "Difficulties show men what they are." Because pain doesn't just test you, it reveals you. It strips away illusion and comfort and asks, who are you underneath? Most people spend their lives avoiding discomfort, but avoidance comes with a cost. You grow slower, smaller, less capable of enduring what life inevitably brings. The Stoics believed that hardship wasn't an obstacle to growth, it was the path to it. What you resist often persists, but what you welcome even reluctantly becomes a tool for transformation. Hardship is the gym for your inner life. It builds patience, sharpens clarity, and shows you what you've been leaning on that can't hold weight. It pushes you beyond theory and into practice, beyond ideas and into action. There's no honor in suffering for its own sake, but there is wisdom in letting it shape you. There is meaning in facing it head-on, not to defeat it, but to understand what it has come to teach. When things fall apart, you learn what still holds. When you lose something, you discover what you were never meant to keep. When you're humbled, you remember what matters. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" You begin to live less like someone who needs life to go a certain way, and more like someone who's ready to meet it however it comes. Not with resentment, but with readiness. Because every difficulty you endure with grace becomes part of your strength, and the moment you stop wishing things were different, you start seeing the beauty in what is. That's the beginning of something deeper than acceptance. It's the beginning of love for the path itself, with all its thorns. It's the beginning of Amor Fati. Amor Fati, love of fate. Most people try to survive their fate. The Stoics taught us to love it. Not just to endure what happens, but to embrace it, to see every event, even the unwanted ones, as part of the pattern that shapes us. Not a curse to escape, but a path to walk with open eyes. Amor Fati means love of fate, not passive acceptance. Active cooperation, a mindset that says, "This is mine, not this is wrong." A way of living that turns resistance into alignment. Friedrich Nietzsche, who carried forward many Stoic ideas, wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." This kind of love isn't sentimental. It doesn't pretend everything is easy. It says, even if this pain never goes away, even if this isn't what I wanted, I can still choose to live fully inside it. It's the opposite of denial. It's engagement. It's leaning into life without conditions. It's asking not, why did this happen to me? But how will I meet what has already arrived? When you practice Amor, Fati, you stop dividing life into good and bad days. You stop wishing your reality were some other shape. You start seeing everything as necessary, not in the sense of cosmic justice, but in the sense that this is what happened, so this is what I will meet. You begin to treat each moment, especially the hard ones, as something shaped for your becoming. Not because fate is kind, but because you are strong. Not because everything is meaningful, but because you can make meaning through how you respond. The Stoics believe that whatever happens can be fuel, that every loss can deepen gratitude, that every frustration can sharpen discipline, that every closed door can build patience. Nothing is wasted unless you waste it. You can choose to see every setback as a refinement, every detour as an unchosen teacher, every limitation as a sculptor of strength. Amor Fati doesn't mean you stop grieving or hurting. It means you grieve without resistance. You hurt without turning away. You let the moment be what it is, and you become what it asks. Because the highest power you have is not to choose what happens, it's to choose how deeply you will live inside what has. That's not just strength, that's love. Fierce love, clear-eyed love. Love that doesn't wait for life to cooperate. And it's the antidote to a mindset that shrinks your power at the first sign of pain. It's the cure for victimhood. The cure for victimhood. Reclaiming your power from what hurt you. Bad things happen. People betray. Circumstances collapse. Pain finds its way in, even when you did everything right. And in the wake of it, victimhood waits. Not as a feeling, but as an identity. A soft place to rest that slowly becomes a cage. The Stoics never denied injustice, but they warned against surrendering your agency to it, because once you let what happened to you become who you are, you give away the last thing you still control, how you live from here. As we have mentioned in the very beginning of this video, Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Victimhood teaches you to obsess over the outside. Stoicism teaches you to come home to the inside, to shift from reaction to reflection, from helplessness to direction. To reclaim your life is not to forget the pain. It's to refuse to become it. To feel fully, but not fuse your identity to the wound. To grieve, to hurt, to process, but also to rise, because victimhood has a strange gravity. It rewards you with sympathy, with a sense of righteousness. It can feel like safety, but it's safety that costs you your growth, your freedom, your authorship of your own story. The danger of victimhood is that it offers comfort without healing. It says, you don't have to change because you were wronged, but that very mindset keeps you frozen, defined by the injury, trapped by the unfairness, waiting for apologies that may never come, waiting for circumstances to become fair before you allow yourself to move forward. But fairness is not a prerequisite for progress. You can grow anyway. You can become anyway. Even while carrying injustice on your shoulders, you can still decide to walk. Freedom begins when you stop needing the past to be different. When you stop needing others to understand. When you stop rehearsing the moment everything cracked and start building from where you are. This doesn't mean blaming yourself. It doesn't mean erasing your story. It means choosing not to be powerless. It means realizing that the world doesn't owe you repair, but you owe yourself movement. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I will not let this define me." You were hurt, but you are still here. And that means you still have choices. To speak differently, to act differently, to grow into someone the past never imagined, someone the pain couldn't predict. Victimhood wants you to stay hurt. Stoicism wants you to become whole. And wholeness begins when you no longer need the world to be fair before you decide to rise. Not because everything is okay, but because you are no longer waiting for it to be. When the world feels unfair, what you do with injustice matters more than what caused it. You did the right thing. You showed up. You gave your best. And still, things broke. Still, you were overlooked. Still, someone else won who cut corners while you held your integrity close. And the question echoes, what's the point of doing good if the outcome doesn't match? The Stoics never promised fairness. They promised strength. Because fairness is out there, subject to luck, systems, people's moods and motives. Strength is in here, built by the choices you make when life doesn't reward you the way it should. Epictetus reminded his students, seek not for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly. Not because injustice is okay, but because wasting your life wishing it weren't happening doesn't make it disappear. Stoicism doesn't ask you to pretend things are fair. It asks you to respond in a way that builds character instead of corrosion, to remain grounded even when the scales are tilted, to act with principle even when the payoff is invisible. Because here's the truth. Injustice creates pressure. Pressure reveals patterns, and patterns show you who you are, what you rely on, what you believe in when believing doesn't offer immediate reward. When the world feels unfair, you have a choice: to become bitter or to become better, to give up or to get sharper, to take shortcuts because others do, or to double down on the values that still mean something to you. You can scream at the storm, or you can become the kind of person who learns to walk through it without losing your center. Someone who grows stronger by not giving in to cynicism. Someone who refuses to let the ugliness of the world decide the shape of their soul. And over time, something unexpected happens. You start to care less about whether the world feels fair and more about whether you feel aligned. You stop performing for reward and start choosing peace over validation. You start to realize that there's a kind of power deeper than external justice. It's the power to shape how you carry injustice when it arrives. Not because you like it, but because you're no longer controlled by it. You don't need every scale to balance to know who you are. You don't need every loss explained to continue walking with integrity. And in that shift, you become someone stronger than the moment. Someone who doesn't break just because the system does. Someone who chooses what kind of person to be, no matter what kind of world they're living in. And that kind of strength is what prepares you for the next truth. You don't always get to choose the pain, but you always get to choose how you carry it. Choosing how you carry pain, the quiet strength of inner posture. Pain comes. That part isn't up to you. It arrives without permission, without warning, without fairness. It comes in the form of loss, failure, illness, betrayal, whatever shape it takes. It disrupts what you thought you could count on. It interrupts your plans, steals your rhythm, and shakes your certainty. But how you carry that pain, that part is yours. The Stoics never denied suffering. They simply believed it wasn't the whole story. What mattered was the posture you chose in its presence. Whether you let pain contort you into something bitter, or whether you used it as a mirror to see what you're made of. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." He didn't glorify pain, he clarified its role. Not as a punishment, but as a sharpening force. Pain reveals the places in you that were still soft, still untested, still waiting to be formed. To carry pain with dignity isn't to become immune to it. It's to move through it with intention. It's choosing what kind of person you'll be, not just when everything's working, but when everything's falling apart. You don't have to smile through suffering. You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt. But you do get to choose whether your pain becomes a weight that drags you under or a weight you learn to carry with grace, with steadiness, with quiet, unfailing presence. Carrying pain with intention doesn't make it disappear, but it changes the way it sits in your life. It creates space between what happened and how you respond. It allows dignity to survive even in the hardest seasons. It lets you show up for others not because you're unharmed, but because you know what it means to hurt and keep going. You begin to walk slower, maybe, but steadier. You speak less, but with more truth. You stop needing the pain to justify itself because you've already begun shaping it into something meaningful. The moment you stop demanding that pain make sense is the moment you begin turning it into strength. You carry it like a stone in your pocket, not to forget it, not to glorify it, but to remind yourself what you've survived and how you survived it. Pain might visit, but it doesn't get to rearrange who you are unless you hand over the keys. And every time you carry it without losing yourself, you become someone harder to break. Someone who feels the weight and still chooses to walk. Someone who refuses to let the wound become the identity. That choice is the foundation for something deeper still. Learning not just to carry pain, but to suffer with dignity. How to suffer with dignity. The grace to endure without losing yourself. There's a kind of pain that demands attention, and another that asks only to be carried well. Suffering is part of life, not because you did something wrong, but because life, by its nature, is unpredictable. The Stoics never promised freedom from suffering. They promised something else, the ability to suffer without losing who you are. To suffer with dignity is to walk through pain without letting it twist your values. It's not about silence or suppression. It's about posture. The way you hold yourself when nothing feels steady. The way you continue to honor your principles even when you're running on fumes, even when nobody's watching, even when no outcome is guaranteed. Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And when what happens to you is deep pain, the reaction becomes a form of character, not in grand gestures, but in small, private choices. Getting out of bed, offering kindness when you have none to spare, refusing to let bitterness take root, returning again and again to what still feels true, even as the world around you tilts. Dignity in suffering doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, a willingness to stay in the experience, to meet it with clarity, to stop running from it long enough to understand what it's making of you. Suffering with dignity is saying, this hurts, and I'm still here. It's asking not how do I escape this, but how do I walk through this and remain intact? It's the refusal to collapse inward, the quiet decision to bring your full self to even the most broken moments. There's a difference between pain and despair. Despair is when you believe the pain has the final word. Dignity is when you walk through the same pain and still find your way forward. Not because it's easy, but because you've chosen not to let your suffering define you. You don't have to look strong to be strong. In fact, the strongest people are often the quietest in their suffering. Not because they don't feel it, but because they've made peace with the fact that pain is part of becoming. They've stopped performing their pain and started learning from it. When you suffer with dignity, you're not just surviving, you're becoming. Not despite the pain, but because of how you chose to meet it. Because of what you refused to let it take from you. Because of the way you stood up, not after it ended, but while it was still happening. And that kind of endurance leads to something quieter, something steadier. Not a loud heroism, but a strength that doesn't need to prove itself. Quiet strength, the power that doesn't need to announce itself. Strength doesn't always look like victory. It doesn't always come with applause or recognition. Often it moves quietly, without ceremony, without display. It isn't flashy. It doesn't demand attention. It simply endures. The Stoics never praised loudness. They admired resilience. Not the kind that postures, but the kind that endures, that remains steady when everything else shakes, that keeps walking, not because the path is easy, but because the values beneath your feet are solid. Marcus Aurelius wrote, Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. He didn't speak of noise. He spoke of stillness, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances to stay rooted, the kind that's forged in silence, in solitude, in the decision to stay aligned when no one is watching. Quiet strength doesn't try to prove itself. It doesn't rely on shouting or proving a point. It doesn't boast. It listens more than it speaks. It holds space rather than filling it. It doesn't panic when things go wrong. It pauses, reflects, and then moves carefully, but with certainty. This kind of strength is found in small, repeated acts. Waking up and showing up when you're tired, choosing not to retaliate when you've been hurt, being kind even when you're not in the mood, saying no when it would be easier to go along, speaking truth softly when everyone else is shouting. It's what allows you to keep your integrity when you're under pressure, to keep your grace when others around you lose theirs, to remain steady not because life is calm, but because you've trained yourself not to flinch every time the wind changes direction. Quiet strength doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to be admired to exist. It draws its power from within. From clarity, from consistency, from choosing to act again and again in ways that align with your values, even when no one else is clapping. It's easy to confuse noise for power, but real strength is often invisible. It's what lets you keep going after defeat, what helps you stand up without announcing you've fallen, what keeps your principles intact even when your plans fall apart. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is just keep going, not louder, not harder, but clearer, with conviction, with stillness, with the kind of force that doesn't need an audience to be real. Because life won't always reward loud strength, but it always respects the kind that endures. And it's that kind of strength you'll need most when everything begins to feel like too much. When life feels like too much, how to stand when the weight keeps growing. There are moments when the world presses in from all sides, when every responsibility feels heavier than it should, when the smallest tasks feel impossible, when your mind races, your body tenses, and your spirit quietly whispers, "I don't know how much more I can take." The Stoics never denied this. They never claimed that strength meant never feeling overwhelmed. They simply believed that overwhelm wasn't the end of the story, that even in the thickest fog, you could still choose your next step. Seneca wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage. Not because life is always unbearable, but because choosing to continue, especially in the face of overwhelm, is itself a mark of quiet strength. In moments of deep pressure, that choice becomes your anchor, unseen, but unshakable. When life feels like too much, the Stoics invite you to narrow your focus, not to fix everything, but to find the smallest action you still control. One breath, one decision, one task. You don't need to carry the whole mountain, just the next stone, and then the next, and then the next. Overwhelm grows in wide angles. Strength grows in tight frames. The more you zoom in, the more you find room to move. It's not about doing more. It's about doing what matters and letting go of what doesn't. It's about trimming your attention down to what is essential, to what is real in this exact moment. When your mind says everything is wrong, come back to what's true in this moment. Are you breathing? Can you move your body? Can you speak kindly to yourself, even if no one else does? Can you choose not to add suffering to pain? The Stoics remind us that endurance doesn't mean smiling through the storm. It means staying in it, fully present, fully human, without letting it erase who you are, without letting it tell you the lie that your value is tied to how well you're handling things. Some days, strength will look like progress. Other days, it will look like patience, like not quitting, like showing up messy, scared, and unsure, but still showing up. It may not feel like strength in the moment, but it's the truest kind, the kind you earn in silence. And in those days, when everything feels too heavy to lift, remember you're not lifting all of it at once. You're taking one breath, one step, one act of quiet courage, and that is enough. That is always enough. That's how you stay standing. And sometimes that's how you begin to turn misfortune into meaning. Finding meaning in misfortune, turning pain into purpose. When things go wrong, the mind rushes to ask, why me? Why now? Why this? But the Stoics shifted the question. They didn't ask why it happened. They asked what they could do with it. Misfortune, they believed, wasn't the end of meaning. It was the beginning of it. Not because pain is inherently noble, but because pain is raw material, something you can shape, something that, if met with clarity, can transform you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." It's one of the most famous Stoic ideas, not because it sounds good, but because it works. It reframes pain as a path. Misfortune, not as a dead end, but as an unexpected door. Meaning doesn't fall from the sky. It's made, crafted in the way you respond, forged in the decision not to waste what hurts. Meaning isn't something that finds you when life is kind. It's something you carve out of the moments when life isn't. When you treat your pain as useless, it becomes weight. When you treat it as instruction, it becomes fuel. What can this teach me? What does it reveal about me? What will I do now that I couldn't have done before? There's a quiet power in asking those questions. It shifts you from victim to creator, from helplessness to responsibility, from suffering because of something to becoming through it. Finding meaning in misfortune doesn't mean everything happens for a reason. It means you can give it one. You can assign value through how you walk through it, through how you grow from it, through the strength and wisdom you pass on because of it. When you do that, when you refuse to let the worst thing be the last thing, you don't erase the pain. You elevate it, you integrate it into a life that is wiser, deeper, more awake. A life that no longer fears misfortune as the end of your story, but sees it as part of the climb. The Stoics didn't romanticize tragedy. They just refused to be defined by it. They knew they couldn't always control the story, but they could control the character they brought to it. And so can you, not by pretending it's easy, but by standing inside it, breathing through it, and deciding this too will shape me. Because every hardship contains a hidden question, will this break you or build you? And the answer, the Stoics believed, is entirely yours. That's the invitation hidden inside every obstacle to test and prove your character. Every obstacle is a test of character, turning trials into proof of who you are. Life doesn't test you with announcements. It doesn't say, this is the moment that will define you. It just happens, quietly, suddenly, and you're left standing in front of something you didn't ask for. A delay, a betrayal, a failure, a storm that doesn't seem to end. Something that disrupts your rhythm, dismantles your plan, and leaves you staring at a wall you didn't see coming. The Stoics believed that obstacles weren't interruptions. They were opportunities, not because they liked pain, but because they understood its potential, the potential to draw out something deeper, something stronger, something more true. They saw hardship as a forge and character as the iron being shaped. Seneca said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." That's not just metaphor, that's instruction. The obstacle isn't just there to be endured, it's there to be engaged, faced, worked with. Not because the path has failed, but because it has begun. Because each time something blocks your path, a second path opens. The one inside you, the one that asks, who will I be now? Will I curse the wall or climb it? Will I retreat or rise? Will I collapse under pressure or be reshaped by it into someone more durable? Obstacles reveal your philosophy. Not the one you talk about, the one you actually live. They strip away pretense. They show you where your strength is real and where it still needs to grow. They introduce you to the parts of yourself you hadn't needed until now. You can't control what the world throws at you, but you can decide what it draws out of you. Discipline, patience, courage, forgiveness, that decision, that inner movement is where character is shaped. It's in those silent, internal responses that no one sees. The ones where you choose to act from principle instead of impulse. Sometimes the obstacle isn't blocking your path. It is the path. It's the very thing you were meant to encounter, because the version of you that can grow beyond this moment doesn't yet exist, and now you have the chance to meet them. So the next time something blocks your way, don't just ask how to remove it. Ask how to meet it. Ask what it's here to develop. Ask what version of yourself you now have the chance to become. Because the world doesn't test your character to watch you fail. It tests your character so you can see it for yourself, so you can feel your own foundation and know what it's made of. And the best way to be ready for those moments, those sudden silent tests, is to start each day with a reminder of who you want to be. The morning inventory, preparing the mind before the day begins. Before the world speaks to you, speak to yourself. The Stoics believed that each morning was an opportunity not just to act, but to align, to prepare the mind before the noise begins, to root yourself in clarity before the chaos starts pulling you in every direction. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, often began his day reminding himself of what he might face: selfishness, rudeness, ignorance. Not to grow cynical, but to stay grounded, to expect difficulty and choose steadiness anyway, to remind himself that other people's behavior doesn't dictate his own. The morning inventory is not a to-do list. It's a who-to-be list, a moment of inner calibration, a check-in with your principles before the day tests them, before circumstances try to rewrite your mood, before the unexpected arrives and demands a response. What matters to me today? What kind of person do I want to be when things don't go my way? Where am I likely to be challenged, and how can I prepare for that now instead of reacting later? Will I be impatient in traffic? Will I lose my temper in a conversation? Will I chase the approval of others or act from my values? The morning inventory is your chance to walk through your day before it begins, mentally, intentionally, and strengthen your posture for when the real moments arrive. The answers don't need to be long, but they need to be honest. The process doesn't require perfection. It just requires presence. Will I choose patience over irritation? Will I choose honesty over approval? Will I remember that what matters most isn't what happens, but how I meet it? In a world that rewards reactivity, the morning inventory is a quiet rebellion, a pause before momentum takes over. A way of saying, I won't hand over my attention without first deciding what it serves. I won't enter the day carrying yesterday's stories or tomorrow's fears. It's not about perfection, it's about orientation. About choosing your posture before the day tries to shape it for you. It's about remembering that control begins not out there but in here. You may not control the traffic, the headlines, the people, the plans, but you can control the space between stimulus and response. And that space expands when you begin your day deliberately. Because when you begin with intention, you respond with clarity. And when you pair that with its closing counterpart, you create a rhythm that sharpens your awareness over time. The evening reflection. The evening reflection, reviewing the day without shame or excuse. The world quiets down. The noise slows. The mask you wore for others can finally come off. And in that stillness, there is space for truth. The Stoics practice something simple but powerful, ending the day by looking inward, not to judge or punish themselves, but to examine honestly, patiently, and without denial. They saw each day as a lesson, and every lesson needs a closing moment of reflection. Seneca wrote, "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of this habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said." This wasn't a performance. It wasn't for display. It was for clarity. The evening reflection isn't a harsh interrogation. It's a return to alignment, a space to ask, where did I act with integrity? Where did I fall short? What did I say that I didn't mean? What emotion took the lead when it should have stepped aside? It's not about self-loathing. It's about self-honesty. And from that honesty, growth emerges, quiet, grounded, and real. You ask yourself, did I act on my values or only on my impulses? Did I move with intention or just react to the day as it came? This is how you catch your drift, before the drift becomes distance, before habit becomes identity. The evening reflection invites you to slow down and observe the self in motion, to look at who you were in the middle of the noise and gently steer back toward who you want to become. There's no scoreboard, no gold stars, just truth. And with truth comes freedom, because only when you see your missteps clearly can you choose something better tomorrow. The Stoics didn't seek perfection. They sought direction, progress. Tiny course corrections made consistently, day by day. The evening reflection is how you learn to close the loop, to end the day with a sense of authorship. Not everything will have gone well. Some things will still sting. But instead of letting that weigh you down, you hold it up to the light. You examine it. You own what's yours, and you let go of what isn't. You become a student of your own life, and each day becomes a page in that lesson. And perhaps most importantly, the evening reflection invites you to remember what was beautiful, what you're grateful for, who you were kind to, who was kind to you. Even the smallest moment, an exchanged glance, a deep breath, a quiet win, can be enough to remind you that it was all worth witnessing. To reflect each evening is to live each day more deeply, to honor your time instead of letting it vanish into the blur. And when that becomes a habit, when your nights begin with honesty and end in peace, you start to see life more clearly, not just in how you live, but in how you're learning to let go. Practicing death every day. How remembering the end sharpens the present. You will die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And every breath you take brings you closer to that moment. The Stoics didn't shy away from this. They brought it close, held it, sat with it, because they believed that remembering death was the surest way to live more fully, not in dread, but in clarity. Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life, wrote Seneca. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. To practice death is to wake up to your life. It's to strip away the illusion of permanence. It's to look at your ordinary day and realize it is not ordinary at all. The conversation you put off, the gratitude you forgot to give, the truth you were too afraid to speak, these things don't wait forever, and neither do you. When you live with death in mind, you stop chasing what doesn't matter. You stop scrolling through your time like it's endless. You start asking deeper questions. If I left tomorrow, would I be proud of how I lived today? Would I leave behind clarity or confusion, regret or completion? Practicing death isn't about morbidity. It's about urgency. It's about holding each moment up to the light and asking, does this reflect who I am? Does this reflect what I value? It turns your life into a canvas where nothing is wasted because everything is seen as temporary. You begin to notice things you'd forgotten to love, the way light touches a table, the warmth of your breath, the chance to try again. You speak more honestly, you forgive more quickly, you stop performing and start showing up. Death brings things into focus, and in that focus, life becomes richer, not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. You become more careful with your attention, more generous with your love, more deliberate with your words, because you understand the cost of delay. The Stoics called this Memento Mori, remember death. But it wasn't meant to paralyze, it was meant to sharpen, to remind you that today isn't practice, it is the main act, and nothing is guaranteed beyond it. So, you live cleaner, quieter, stronger. You let go of the pettiness that once pulled at you. You give your energy to what matters most. Not because it's impressive, but because it's yours. And in that space, something unexpected happens. You stop needing so much from the world. You stop needing recognition. You stop clinging to applause. You simply do what needs to be done. And that, the Stoics would say, is the mark of someone truly alive. Do the work, let go of the credit, acting without attachment to recognition. Not everything you do will be noticed. Not every effort will be praised. You can do the right thing with your whole heart and be misunderstood, overlooked, forgotten. The Stoics would say, do it anyway. Because virtue isn't measured by applause, it's measured by integrity. And integrity asks only one thing, that you act in alignment with your values, whether anyone sees it or not. Epictetus put it simply, don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. That means your reward is the action itself, the clarity of doing the right thing, the quiet satisfaction of not needing approval to stay upright. When you act only to be seen, you become fragile, dependent. You hand your worth to the moods of other people. But when you act from principle, the world's response becomes less important. You stop performing goodness and start living it. This is not easy. The desire for recognition runs deep. We want to be acknowledged. We want our effort to matter to someone else. But the Stoics challenge us to dig beneath that need, to ask, if no one saw me do this, would I still do it? If I never get credit, is the act still worth it? To let go of credit is not to let go of care. It's to act from a higher form of care. A care that asks, is this true to who I want to be, rather than, will this be appreciated? That shift changes everything. You become less reactive, less desperate for validation, more rooted in purpose. You begin to find fulfillment in effort itself, not outcome, not praise, not visibility. And paradoxically, when you stop needing credit, your actions often speak louder. Not because they're louder, but because they're cleaner, free of ego, free of agenda, free of the subtle tension that comes from trying to be liked. Do the work. Not because someone's watching, not because it will be remembered, but because it's the kind of work that aligns you with your highest self. Be kind, even if it's not returned. Be honest, even if it's not recognized. Be steady, even when others are not. Because real strength is not loud. Real strength is not self-promoting. Real strength is in the quiet decisions to live your values without needing a stage. And when you do that enough, something starts to shift inside you. You no longer live to prove. You live to practice. You stop chasing admiration and start building discipline. And over time, that discipline becomes something deeper, something less visible, but more powerful. It becomes a habit, a way of moving through the world that needs no reward beyond itself. Turning philosophy into habit. When ideas become actions without effort. Philosophy doesn't live in books. It doesn't live in quotes or ideas or long, clever explanations. It lives in your choices, in how you wake up, in how you respond when the moment is difficult and there's no script to follow. The Stoics understood this better than most. They didn't care how much you knew. They cared how well you lived. Seneca said, philosophy teaches us to act, not to speak. And if you read his letters, you'll notice how often he turns from theory to practice, from elegant reasoning to ordinary moments, because that's where the work is done. It's one thing to believe in patience. It's another to hold your tongue when anger flares. It's one thing to admire resilience. It's another to get out of bed on a day that feels unbearable. Real progress is measured in the moments no one sees, the places where ideas are turned into muscle. The goal of Stoic practice is not to become someone who always tries harder. It's to become someone who responds automatically from principle, not perfectly, but steadily, reliably, without needing to debate what matters each time the pressure rises. And how do you do that? Through repetition, through showing up, through the daily, sometimes boring, often invisible work of aligning your actions with your values, even when you're tired, especially when you're tired. Habits don't form overnight, and they don't stick by force. They grow through quiet consistency. You show up again and again, until what used to feel like effort becomes your new baseline. The Stoics didn't separate philosophy from life. For them, life was the training ground. Every conversation, every failure, every frustration was a chance to deepen the pattern. Not just to know what the good life looks like, but to live it in real time. You're not meant to rely on willpower every time you need to act with courage or kindness. You're meant to have practiced enough that those virtues live in your bones. That when something difficult happens, your response isn't calculated, it's natural. This doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. By building habits that reflect your ideals. By rehearsing your values in the small decisions so you can rely on them in the big ones. And there's nothing glamorous about this. It's not dramatic. It's not always inspiring. But over time, it builds something stronger than inspiration. It builds discipline. And discipline is what allows you to stop overthinking, stop delaying, stop negotiating with yourself every time a challenge appears. Because when you've trained well, you don't wait for ideal conditions. You begin right where you are, even when the thing in front of you is the hardest thing of all. Start with the hard thing, building strength where resistance lives. There's always something we avoid. A task that waits, a conversation we postpone, a decision we delay. Not because we don't know what to do, but because it's heavy, uncomfortable, demanding. And so we start with the easy things, the low-friction wins. The rituals of false productivity that help us feel like we're in motion, but keep us circling the edge of what matters most. The Stoics would ask, why delay the very thing that strengthens you? Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I am rising to do the work of a human being. That's not just about duty. It's about direction, about rising to meet the hard thing. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's necessary. Starting with the hard thing is a way of telling yourself the truth, that growth lives at the edge of resistance, that your fear of the thing is often louder than the thing itself, that freedom isn't found in avoidance, but in action. When you begin your day with the thing you want to avoid, you take control back from hesitation. You build momentum where most people lose it. You put your values in motion instead of just your intentions. This isn't about rushing into suffering. It's about choosing the meaningful over the convenient. About asking, what would I do if I weren't afraid? What would I do if I trusted myself to face what's difficult? When you do the hard thing first, everything else sharpens. You carry a sense of capability with you. You stop flinching every time pressure rises. You learn to associate discomfort not with failure, but with forward motion. The hard thing could be a conversation. It could be a truth you need to accept. It could be the long-term work of healing, of letting go, of beginning again. Whatever it is, it holds the power to shape you. And the longer you wait, the more power you give it. Start there, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. Start there because it sets the tone for how you'll face the rest of the day. Not reacting, not avoiding, but choosing. And in that choice, you reclaim your agency. The Stoics believed in training difficulty, not running from it. They chose discomfort as a kind of preparation, not to suffer more, but to suffer less when it arrived. And when you practice meeting difficulty head-on, you become something stronger than resilient. You become reliable to yourself. Because the strength that matters isn't measured by how much you talk about change. It's measured by how often you move toward it, even when it's uphill. And the moment you begin there where resistance lives, you begin to live with intention, not impulse. You begin to live deliberately. What it means to live deliberately, choosing your life before it chooses you. Most people are carried by life. Days slip by in habit. Choices are made on autopilot. 1 hour blurs into the next, until suddenly weeks, months, years have passed, and they were busy the whole time, but not really awake. The Stoics saw this clearly. They knew that without intention, life becomes a series of reactions. We don't choose how we live. We respond to what arrives. We let urgency replace meaning. We confuse activity with purpose. To live deliberately is to interrupt that cycle. To step back and ask, is this the life I mean to live? Not in theory, but in real time. In how I spend this hour. In what I say and what I don't. In what I chase and what I quietly let go of. Henry David Thoreau, deeply influenced by Stoic thought, wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach." The Stoics might not have fled to the forest, but they shared the instinct to strip life down to what truly matters, and to build from there. Deliberate living isn't slow motion. It isn't about overthinking every move. It's about intention. It's about doing things on purpose, not just because they're familiar, expected, or easy. It's about asking, what kind of life do I want to live, and how do I begin living it right now in this moment? You can be deliberate in conversation, in how you listen, in how you speak. You can be deliberate in how you eat, in how you rest, in how you start your day. None of it has to be dramatic. It just has to be real, conscious, yours. The Stoics taught that freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's wanting what you do. Aligning your choices with your principles, finding consistency between your values and your actions. That's the root of peace. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of coherence. Living deliberately often requires saying no. Not just to distractions, but to versions of yourself that no longer fit. It means releasing habits that once served you but now quietly erode your time. It means taking responsibility for your energy, not waiting for the world to give you permission to use it well. It takes courage. It takes awareness. But it doesn't take perfection, just presence, just willingness. Just the small, repeated act of choosing how you move, how you speak, how you respond, especially when it's easier not to think at all. And slowly, the scattered pieces of your days begin to align. You begin to recognize yourself in how you live. Your life no longer happens to you, it flows from you. And in that shift, a deeper virtue emerges, a way of moving that isn't rushed, a life that honors its own rhythm. A kind of strength that waits, listens, and responds, not to pressure, but to purpose. The virtue of slowing down, reclaiming depth in a speed-obsessed world. We move fast, always, from screen to screen, task to task, thought to thought. Our lives are full, our calendars packed, and our minds rarely still. We treat slowness like failure, as if speed were proof of importance, as if rushing meant we mattered. But the Stoics weren't interested in urgency. They were interested in clarity. They knew that moving fast doesn't mean moving well, and they saw how easily we confuse momentum with direction. To slow down is not to fall behind. It's to step out of the trance, to step away from the noise long enough to ask, is this the pace my life actually requires? Is this rhythm mine, or just the one I've inherited from the world around me? Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And one of the greatest ways we waste it is through unconscious hurry, through treating every hour like a race to be won rather than a space to be lived." Slowing down is an act of rebellion in a culture addicted to speed. It says, I will not rush through what matters. I will not confuse more with better. I will not live on autopilot just because I'm good at keeping busy. To slow down doesn't mean to stop. It means to move with presence. To feel the moment you're in. To taste your food. To hear the pause in someone's voice. To walk without checking your phone. To breathe before answering. To live from the inside out. Slowness is not laziness. It's attention. It's awareness. It's the decision to make your life rich, not just full. And it's in slowing down that we often meet ourselves again. Because when the noise quiets, we hear the quieter truths. The ones we couldn't catch while we were sprinting. We notice where we've been out of alignment, where we've been trying too hard to keep up with things we never needed in the first place. Slowing down lets you recalibrate. It gives space for reflection. It helps you stop living at the mercy of the next thing. And in that space, priorities become clear. Decisions become intentional. Life stops being something you chase and starts being something you shape. The Stoics would ask not how fast you're moving, but where you're going and why, and they'd remind you that depth is rarely found in haste, that wisdom doesn't rush, that stillness is a form of strength. So when the world pushes you to hurry, to maximize, to optimize, you don't have to obey. You can slow down. You can choose quality over speed. You can act from rhythm, not pressure. And in doing so, you give yourself permission to make progress on your own terms. Progress without perfection. Showing up even when you're not there yet. Perfection is a moving target. A promise that if you just try hard enough, one day you'll arrive. One day you'll feel complete, fully disciplined, fully wise, finally strong enough to live without flaw. But the Stoics knew better. They knew that perfection is not the goal, progress is. They understood that the work of becoming is never done, that no one ever fully arrives, and that believing otherwise only fuels shame, hesitation, and self-judgment. Seneca wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." He wasn't giving permission to stagnate. He was giving permission to be in process, to remain in motion, to improve slowly, honestly, without the pressure to be finished. Progress isn't linear, it's messy. You'll take steps forward and slip back again. You'll forget what you thought you'd learned. You'll lose your temper after weeks of patience. You'll fall into old habits after feeling like you'd outgrown them. But if you measure yourself by those stumbles, you'll miss the deeper movement, the gradual strengthening, the slow rewiring, the quiet momentum that builds not in leaps, but in daily returns. The Stoics didn't demand flawlessness. They demanded sincerity, effort, a willingness to examine yourself, a commitment to begin again without despair. Because every time you come back to your practice, it becomes more deeply yours. You begin to see progress in subtler places, in how quickly you recover, in how gently you speak to yourself when you fall short, in how much less you need to be right, in how much more you value alignment over impression. To let go of perfection is not to lower your standards. It's to raise your resilience, to stop giving up every time the ideal slips from reach, to stay in the work without needing a flawless scorecard. Progress means continuing when it's inconvenient, when you don't feel like it, when you're tired of not being where you thought you'd be by now. It means remembering that who you are becoming matters more than how fast you're becoming them, that small, honest efforts compound, that showing up is its own kind of transformation. The Stoics didn't wait to be perfect before they practiced wisdom. They practiced wisdom to learn how to live better day by day. And you don't need to wait to be ready. You just need to return to your values, to your effort, to your path. Even if you're limping, even if you're late, even if you failed yesterday, keep going. Not because you're perfect, but because you care enough to try again. Resisting the drift toward comfort, choosing growth over ease. Comfort is seductive. It offers warmth, safety, predictability. It tells you to slow down, take it easy, stay where it's familiar. And there's nothing wrong with comfort in doses. But when comfort becomes your default, growth becomes distant. And the Stoics knew how easily that drift can happen. You don't have to choose comfort directly to fall into it. It's the passive path, the slow erosion of difficulty, the gentle retreat from anything that stretches, sharpens, or challenges you. It starts with skipping what's inconvenient, avoiding what's uncomfortable, delaying what's hard, and before you know it, you've built a life around the avoidance of effort. The Stoics resisted this drift not because they hated ease, but because they loved strength. Because they understood that resilience is not born in softness, it's earned in adversity. It's developed in tension, in discomfort, in the daily practice of choosing what's right over what's easy. Epictetus said, "Difficulties are things that show a person what they are." If you avoid all difficulty, you never really know yourself. You never learn your edge. You never develop the courage to stand where it's hard and stay. To resist comfort is not to reject rest. It's to reject complacency. It's to reject the slow numbness that comes from always doing what feels good at the expense of what makes you better. Growth rarely feels good in the moment. It feels awkward, frustrating, fatiguing. But it builds something underneath the surface, something you can only access by staying in the discomfort long enough to change. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort for this reason. They fasted, walked in the cold, trained their minds to be calm in chaos, not to suffer needlessly, but to build the kind of resilience that doesn't collapse under pressure, the kind of presence that doesn't depend on comfort to function. And in a world that offers convenience at every turn, this kind of training matters more than ever. Because modern life will always offer you the soft path, the dopamine loop, the comfort zone wrapped in endless content and numbing habits. But you don't have to accept the offer. You can wake up early when you don't feel like it. You can say the hard truth when silence would be easier. You can take the next step even when it's uphill. Not to prove something, but to remember who you are when things get real. Comfort will always be there when you need it, but it should never be your compass. The Stoics knew that the good life wasn't built by avoiding hardship. It was built by engaging with it deliberately, by learning to stay calm in discomfort, by refusing to trade growth for ease. Because some things can only be found on the other side of resistance, and the people who reach them aren't the ones who had it easy. They're the ones who kept going anyway. And the deeper your strength grows, the more you begin to notice where true control ends and where acceptance must begin. You start to see that the same impulse that seeks ease often tries to grasp too tightly, even at the cost of love, even when it comes to the people you care for most. You don't own the people you love. Letting go without letting them go. Love often comes with an illusion that if you care deeply enough, you somehow gain a kind of ownership, not in words but in expectations, in the quiet belief that the people we love should reflect our values, meet our needs, or stay within the lines we've drawn. The Stoics warned against this. They reminded us that nothing truly belongs to us, not even the people closest to our hearts. We may walk beside them, care for them, sacrifice for them, but we do not own them. And the more we try to, the more we suffer. Epictetus said, "Never say about anything, 'I have lost it,' but only 'I have given it back.'" He was talking about impermanence, about releasing our grip on things we never truly held. And this includes relationships. To love someone does not mean to control their choices. It does not mean to be protected from their distance, their change, their struggle. Love is not possession. It is presence. It is the decision to support rather than direct, to witness rather than mold, to remain open even when they are different than we hoped. So much pain in relationships comes not from what people do, but from what we expected them to do. We grieve the gap between who they are and who we thought they'd be. We tighten our grip in hopes that our fear will keep them close. But closeness, built on fear, is not love. It's dependency. The Stoic approach is different. It says, love with everything you have, but remember, they are not yours. Their path is not yours to walk. Their growth is not yours to manage. Their choices are not yours to make. This isn't cold, it's compassionate. It allows people the dignity of their own experience. It respects their autonomy. And in doing so, it frees you too. Because when you stop clinging, you start connecting. You stop trying to reshape them and start truly seeing them. You create space for honesty, for mutual respect, for love that breathes instead of binds. You can set boundaries without controlling. You can express needs without demanding outcomes. You can be there fully while allowing them to be fully themselves. And yes, this means you risk being hurt. It means they might grow away from you. It means they might not meet you where you hoped they would. But love that requires certainty isn't love. It's insurance. Real love, the kind the Stoics point to, exists within impermanence. It is made stronger, not weaker, by the understanding that everything can change and that people are free even when they're deeply loved. So, let them be free. Love them fiercely. But let them go inside your heart, even as you hold them in your life. Because the more you release your grip, the more clearly you see what's real. And that clarity has a way of revealing another deep truth. That our suffering in relationships often has less to do with others and more to do with what we hope they'd be. Expecting too much from others. How unrealistic hopes create real disappointment. We walk into relationships, friendships, family, romance, with a silent script. We may not speak it, but we feel it, how people should behave, how they should respond, how they should make us feel. And when they don't follow that script, we call it betrayal. We call it distance. But often it's just reality doing what it does. The Stoics cautioned against putting your peace in the hands of other people. Not because they didn't value connection, but because they understood human nature. They understood how expectation, when inflated, becomes a guarantee of frustration. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You will meet people who are selfish, ungrateful, deceitful," not to harden himself, but to prepare, to lower his expectations of others, not to judge them, but to stay rooted in his own behavior. He knew he could only control his part. We suffer not just because people disappoint us, but because we built stories around who they were supposed to be. And when they don't live up to those stories, we feel robbed. Not because they failed, but because we believed a version of them that was never ours to write. When you expect too much, you become fragile, dependent, easily hurt by the difference between your vision of someone and their reality. But when you release those expectations, something changes. You begin to see them more clearly. You start listening instead of projecting. You allow space for their complexity. This isn't about having no expectations. It's about having appropriate ones. About recognizing the limits of others without turning cynical. About accepting that people will act according to their nature, their experiences, their struggles, not your preferences. We all have blind spots. We all fall short. And the Stoic path is one that reminds us, assume less, observe more. Replace entitlement with understanding. Replace disappointment with responsibility. Because it's not other people's job to complete your story, it's their job to live theirs. And when they fall short of your hopes, you have a choice. Hold it against them or hold space for their humanity. Let people be who they are, not who you need them to be. It's not passive. It's liberating. It allows you to stay rooted in your values, even when others are inconsistent. It frees you from chasing reactions, approval, or emotional symmetry. And the more you practice this, the less you take things personally. You stop internalizing what was never yours. You stop riding the emotional waves of other people's moods. You begin to show up not as someone waiting to be treated perfectly, but as someone strong enough to meet people where they are. And that strength invites something rare. A kind of love that doesn't cling. A kind of grace that doesn't demand. Because when you no longer expect people to carry the weight of your peace, you become free to truly see them. Even if they never change. Even if they never meet you exactly where you are. Letting people be themselves. Making peace with the unchangeable. People don't become who we want. They become who they are. And when we forget that, we start to shape our relationships around frustration. We try to fix, to mold, to improve. We think, if they could just see it the way I do, if they could just be a little more like this. And beneath that thought is a quiet kind of control, one that often wears the mask of care. The Stoics would remind us that our peace lies not in shaping others but in accepting them, not in agreement, but in clarity. Epictetus said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our opinions about them." That includes people. It's not just what they say or do, it's our belief that they should be different that stirs the unrest. To let someone be themselves doesn't mean tolerating harm. It doesn't mean abandoning boundaries. It means releasing the belief that their change is your responsibility. It means giving them the dignity to grow or not grow on their own terms. And when you do that, something shifts. Conversations soften. Expectations loosen. You stop interpreting every difference as a threat. You begin to witness, not manage. You meet people where they are instead of dragging them to where you wish they'd be. There's a quiet freedom in that. You get to love people for who they are, not just for who they could be. You see them with clearer eyes. You notice the good more easily. You forgive more quickly. Letting people be themselves doesn't make you weaker. It makes you wiser. It makes your relationships lighter, more honest, more human. Because you're no longer negotiating for control, you're practicing respect. And that respect makes space for real connection, not conditional closeness, not performance, but presence, a kind of peace that doesn't depend on perfect alignment. It's not always easy, especially when you care, especially when you believe they'd be happier with a little change. But peace never begins with fixing someone else. It begins with recognizing what's not yours to fix. And when you stop trying to change everyone else, you make room to understand yourself more deeply. You return your focus to what is yours, to how you show up, how you speak, how you love, without expectation, without manipulation. And from that place, you learn something else. You don't need to be understood to stay centered. You don't even need to be liked. When you are not liked, finding freedom in letting go of approval. No matter how kind you are, how thoughtful, how well-intentioned, someone won't like you. They may misunderstand you, dismiss you, disagree with you in ways that feel personal. And the instinct is to fix it, to explain, to adjust yourself just enough to win them over. Because being liked feels like safety, like proof that you're good, that you belong. But the Stoics would ask, who are you when you stop chasing approval? Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, I cannot escape death, but at least I can escape the fear of it. I cannot control what others think, but I can choose not to be owned by their judgment. He wasn't indifferent, he was anchored. He understood that a life tethered to praise is not a free life. It's a life of constant self-editing. When you rely on being liked, Your identity becomes negotiable. You shapeshift to stay safe. You silence truths to keep the peace. You confuse agreement with connection. But approval is unstable. It changes with context, with mood, with misunderstanding. It's not a solid foundation for peace. What's solid is character. What's solid is knowing who you are when no one's clapping. You can be respectful without being agreeable. You can be kind without being passive. You can be authentic without being accepted. And when you do that, when you choose to live in alignment, even when it costs you something, you begin to build real self-trust. This doesn't mean shutting people out. It doesn't mean not caring. It means caring differently. It means recognizing that someone's dislike of you is often more about their lens than your truth. And the moment you stop performing to earn a seat at the table, you become the kind of person who can build their own. There will be times when your boundaries disappoint people. When your honesty makes someone uncomfortable. When your presence alone feels like resistance to someone else's expectations. That's not failure. That's friction between your growth and their comfort. Don't shrink to fit. Don't soften your edges just to keep things smooth. Don't abandon your clarity just to feel wanted. Because the cost of being liked by everyone is often becoming someone you no longer recognize. And the people who truly resonate with you, the ones who see you, not just enjoy you, will only find you when you stop hiding. So let go of the need to be universally liked. Let go of the need to always win the room. You have more important things to protect, like your integrity. And that begins with releasing the habit that breaks it most often, the need to always be right. Release the need to be right, letting go of the ego's favorite addiction. There's a subtle pleasure in being right, a small victory, a sense of control, of superiority, of certainty. It feels like proof that we've figured something out, that we're smart, capable, justified, and yet the more we cling to being right, the more we distort what matters. The Stoics knew this well. They warned against mistaking victory for wisdom. They cautioned against the ego's quiet obsession with dominance, especially in conversation, especially in moments where silence would have served better than certainty. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." The need to be right closes the door to understanding. It narrows the mind. It makes every disagreement a contest, every question a threat. When being right becomes a reflex, we stop listening, we interrupt, we correct. We build arguments instead of bridges. And worst of all, we harden, because the deeper the need to be right goes, the more fragile we become in the face of challenge. Letting go of that need doesn't mean giving up on truth. It means separating truth from pride. It means asking yourself not just what's correct, but what's kind, what's useful, what's wise in this moment. Some arguments aren't worth winning. Some points don't need to be proven. Some conversations aren't battlegrounds. They're mirrors, showing us how attached we've become to hearing our own voice. Releasing the need to be right invites something rare, curiosity. It allows you to be a learner again, to ask better questions, to enter dialogue with humility rather than a scoreboard. It also builds connection, because few things close hearts faster than the sense that someone only values being heard, not hearing. And few things soften tension like the willingness to say, "I could be wrong, tell me more. What matters most here?" The Stoics weren't passive thinkers. They didn't avoid truth, but they understood that ego is often loudest when it feels most insecure. And that real confidence doesn't need to win every debate. It needs to act with integrity, even when that means walking away. You don't need to dominate to be strong. You don't need to prove someone wrong to be wise. You don't need to speak just because you know something. Sometimes restraint reveals more mastery than rebuttal, because there's a quiet kind of strength in choosing clarity over control. And once you've tasted that strength, you start to see something else. that the emotions we once used to protect our pride, especially anger, were never signs of power. They were signals of something much smaller. Anger is a weakness. The illusion of power in losing control. Anger feels powerful. It surges. It sharpens. It demands to be seen, to be heard, to be obeyed. In the heat of it, we often mistake it for strength. We confuse volume with clarity, force with authority. But the Stoics saw it differently. To them, anger wasn't power. It was loss. Loss of reason. Loss of control. Loss of freedom. A moment where something outside of you dictates your internal state and you let it. Seneca wrote an entire book on anger. In it, he described it not as a natural emotion to be indulged, but as a dangerous fire to be mastered. No plague has cost the human race more, he warned. Because anger not only destroys others, it corrodes the person who carries it. It makes you reactive, blind, easily manipulated. Anyone can provoke you, and in doing so, they own you. Your peace becomes dependent on their behavior. Your energy is spent justifying reactions instead of responding with purpose. The Stoics taught that real strength is measured in composure, in the ability to stay grounded when provoked, to remain thoughtful when others are reckless, to choose how you act rather than be dragged by instinct. That doesn't mean never feeling anger. It means not becoming it. It means recognizing it as a signal, not a strategy. A moment to pause, not a permission slip to harm or dominate. When you're angry, ask, what am I trying to protect? What am I afraid of losing? What expectation did reality just violate? These questions shrink the ego's grip. They expose the root behind the flame. Anger often comes from pride, from entitlement, from the belief that things should go your way, that people should act how you expect, that discomfort is injustice. But life isn't bound to your preferences, and demanding that it be is a sure path to constant rage. Restraint isn't weakness, it's mastery. To stay steady when insulted, to remain kind when dismissed, to walk away instead of lashing out. These aren't passive choices. They're disciplined ones. They require more effort than yelling ever will. The Stoics believe that character is tested in moments of provocation, not in how loudly you respond, but in how clearly you stay aligned with who you want to be. Because anyone can raise their voice, but only the strong can raise their standard in the face of it. And when you learn to treat anger not as proof of strength, but as a call to examine your ego, you begin to see it differently. Your frustration often has nothing to do with truth and everything to do with the illusion of superiority. Ego and the illusion of superiority, the quiet trap of thinking you're above. Ego is clever. It doesn't always show up as arrogance or obvious pride. Sometimes it hides in comparison, in judgment, in the quiet satisfaction of thinking, I would never do that. The Stoics warned us that the most dangerous part of the ego isn't how it looks to others, but how it distorts what we see in ourselves. It makes us mistake comfort for virtue, status for worth, control for strength. It whispers that we've figured things out while others stumble, that our perspective is more grounded, that our pain is more noble, that our values are more real. And slowly, without realizing it, we build a pedestal we didn't mean to climb. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You should consider that you also are mortal, and that the same things that happen to others could happen to you. Because the moment you begin to feel superior to someone else, you've already forgotten how fragile and shared the human experience really is." Ego feeds on comparison, but comparison is a mirror that distorts. It doesn't show you truth. It shows you comfort. It lets you feel better for a moment, but it keeps you stuck in a loop, always watching others, always measuring, always slightly above or slightly below. The Stoics didn't measure themselves against other people. They measured themselves against their own principles. their own progress, their own alignment. Because superiority is a distraction. It pulls your focus outward when it needs to be inward. It keeps you chasing status instead of practicing substance. There's nothing strong about needing to feel above someone. That need reveals insecurity, not wisdom. True strength doesn't inflate, it steadies. It doesn't boast, it listens. It doesn't compare, it commits. The antidote to ego is humility. Not false modesty, not self-erasure, but a quiet commitment to growth. A willingness to stay teachable, to be wrong, to not always have the sharpest insight or the most polished life. You can lead without needing applause. You can know your worth without proving it. You can walk with confidence without looking down. Because when you stop trying to be above others, you find yourself standing beside them. And from that place, you can see more clearly. You can help without condescension. You can connect without competition. And in that connection, a new kind of strength emerges, not the kind that's fed by hierarchy, but the kind that's rooted in grace. A strength that forgives, even when forgiveness isn't asked for. Forgiving without requiring apology, freeing yourself from the weight. We wait for recognition, for regret, for someone to admit they were wrong. We tell ourselves that healing will come once they understand, once they apologize, once they say the thing they never said. But the Stoics would gently ask, what if they never do? What if the apology never arrives? What if the person who hurt you doesn't see it, or doesn't care, or simply vanishes from your life before they ever make it right? Must your peace remain hostage to their awareness? Seneca wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." That isn't about moral superiority. It's about reclaiming your agency. It's about refusing to let someone else's failure become a chain around your spirit. Forgiveness, in the Stoic sense, is not about excusing the offense. It's about releasing the weight of resentment. It's a decision to stop waiting for someone else to set you free, to no longer tie your emotional state to someone else's behavior. When you forgive without an apology, you're not saying it didn't matter. You're saying it matters so much that you refuse to carry it any longer. You're saying your peace is worth more than your pride, more than your story of being wronged, more than the silent contract that says, "You owe me closure." This doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean opening the door again. It simply means choosing clarity over poison. It means stepping out of the past and back into your own life. Resentment feels righteous. It makes you the protagonist of your pain, but it also keeps you stuck there, reliving it, replaying it, reinforcing it. Forgiveness says, I can feel the full weight of what happened and still decide not to let it own me. It's not weakness, it's strength. It's strength to grieve what you never got. Strength to let go of debts that won't be paid. Strength to heal even when justice is incomplete. Forgiveness is yours to give, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. You deserve to stop rehearsing the same anger, to stop checking the door for someone who may never return, to stop tying your healing to someone else's growth. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently. It means placing the pain where it belongs in the past and letting your future unfold without dragging it behind you. And when you do that, when you release the need for an apology that may never come, you begin to reclaim something sacred. The part of you that no one else has power over. The part of you that can be whole, even in the silence. Learning to be alone without loneliness. The strength found in solitude. There's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. One is a condition of the environment. The other is a condition of the mind. You can be surrounded by people and still feel deeply isolated. And you can be by yourself and feel full, connected, complete. The Stoics valued solitude not as escape, but as training, as clarity, as a way to step back from the noise of the world and hear yourself think, hear yourself feel. To know what beliefs are truly yours and which were inherited, absorbed, or imposed. Epictetus said, if you are ever tempted to look for outside approval, realize that you have compromised your integrity. If you need a witness, be your own. Solitude teaches you to become that witness, to be enough for yourself without performance. And before you can feel truly at home in the world, you must first feel at home with yourself, alone, unapplauded, undistracted. Most people fear aloneness because it exposes the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. In the silence, old thoughts echo. In the stillness, discomfort rises. But the Stoic doesn't flinch from this. The Stoic leans in, because what you find there is not emptiness. It's the raw material of transformation. When you can sit with yourself without reaching for a screen, a voice, a rush of activity, you begin to discover something unshakable. That your value isn't contingent on being seen, that your peace isn't dependent on being understood, that your wholeness doesn't require constant affirmation. Aloneness, when practiced, becomes a mirror. It shows you who you are when no one's watching. And that is where true confidence begins, not the kind built on validation, but the kind rooted in presence. You start to see that loneliness isn't cured by company. It's cured by connection. And that connection begins with the self, with knowing your rhythms, your thoughts, your values, with becoming someone you can sit with without needing to escape. This doesn't mean retreating from others. It means not needing others to fill the spaces you haven't learned to sit in yet. It means relating out of fullness, not out of lack, giving, not grasping, sharing your time, not outsourcing your identity. The Stoics didn't idealize isolation. They understood the value of community. But they also knew that without the ability to stand alone, you risk becoming someone who follows the crowd, not because it's right, but because silence feels unbearable. So you learn to be alone, not because you want to be apart, but because you want to be whole. And from that wholeness, you step back into the world differently. You're less reactive, more discerning, less needy, more present. And in that presence, you begin to understand the difference between solitude and disconnection, between being alone and being untouched. You begin to understand what you truly owe yourself, and just as importantly, what you owe others. What we owe one another: duty, dignity, and the shared burden of being human. You don't owe the world your perfection. You don't owe strangers your obedience. But you do owe something. And the Stoics were clear about this. What we owe one another is decency, integrity, a commitment not to make the burden of living harder for someone else. We owe each other the simple effort of trying not to harm, and when possible, the effort to help. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, what injures the hive injures the bee. We are not isolated beings. Even as we cultivate strength within, we remain bound to others in quiet, invisible ways. The health of the whole shapes the health of the individual, and vice versa. The Stoic idea of duty isn't rooted in guilt. It's rooted in clarity. You don't owe others your energy when you're depleted, but you owe them your honesty. You don't owe them agreement, but you owe them your civility, your restraint, your refusal to let contempt become your default posture. What we owe one another is a world that isn't governed entirely by impulse. A world where people can disagree without being dehumanized, where dignity isn't earned, it's honored, even in silence, even in passing. In a time when indifference is easy, where cruelty is often disguised as strength, it takes real discipline to remain decent, to be thoughtful when it's not required, to choose clarity over sarcasm, to listen when you'd rather dismiss. This isn't softness. This is Stoic practice. It's the decision to treat others not based on what they deserve, but based on who you are and who you want to be. Sometimes the person across from you is carrying more than you'll ever see. They're walking through fire you'll never feel. Stoicism doesn't ask you to carry their weight, but it does ask you not to add to it unnecessarily. We don't have to save everyone, but we can make space. We can speak carefully. We can soften our judgment. We can move through the world in a way that leaves less damage behind us. What you owe the world is not glory, it's steadiness. It's showing up without needing attention. It's doing the right thing even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. And if there's a final reason to live this way, it's this. Because one day you won't be here. One day your words, your actions, your trace in the world will be all that's left. And you'll want to know you left something worth remembering. Memento Mori. Remember you must die. There is nothing morbid about remembering death. What's morbid is forgetting it, living as if time were endless, as if later were a guarantee. The Stoics reminded themselves daily, Memento Mori, remember you must die, not to darken their mood, but to brighten their focus, to sharpen what mattered, to make each choice heavier with meaning. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." This wasn't fear, it was freedom. The freedom to stop pretending. The freedom to live without waiting for the perfect moment. The freedom to stop wasting time on things that won't matter at the end. Death doesn't need to be feared to be respected. It doesn't need to be invited to be prepared for. And the Stoic doesn't dwell on it out of despair, but out of reverence. Because once you accept that your days are numbered, each one becomes priceless. You realize that the small act of kindness is never small, that the unsent message may never be sent, that the silence between loved ones might be the last silence. You become more deliberate not because you're afraid of dying, but because you've stopped pretending that you're not. Memento Mori strips life down to its essentials. It asks, what would I do differently if I knew I might not return tomorrow? What would I say if I didn't get a second chance? What burden would I put down, and what truth would I finally pick up? And the answers to these questions often surprise us. We realize how much we postpone out of habit, how many things we consider someday that really belong to now, how much beauty we overlook, not because it's hidden, but because we're distracted. This is not a call to urgency. It's a call to depth, a call to presence, a reminder that life is not something you manage. It's something you meet. And the meeting is always brief. The Stoics believed that remembering death didn't end your joy. It made it more vivid. You notice more. You waste less. You say what you mean while you still can. You forgive more quickly. You take things less personally. And you hold the people you love a little closer. And when you live like that, not recklessly, but clearly, you stop waiting for life to begin, because it already has. And it's leaving quietly, whether or not you notice. Treating today like a farewell, living as if this moment matters most. What if you knew today was the last time, the last sunrise, the last conversation, the last time you laughed with someone you love? Would you move differently? Speak more carefully? Would you hold someone longer, or say the thing you've been waiting to say? The Stoics didn't suggest we obsess over endings, but they did suggest we remember them, because it's in remembering that things end that we start to live with more attention. Seneca wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing." That's not about fear. It's about presence. Because when we forget how little time we have, we treat it carelessly. We let small annoyances steal hours. We push important words into the vague future. We act like there will always be more. But what if there isn't? Treating today like a farewell doesn't mean dramatizing your life. It means respecting it. It means understanding that everything you touch, every relationship, every moment, every breath is on loan. temporary, unrepeatable. It means seeing ordinary things with extraordinary clarity. The way someone smiles at you, the way the air feels in the morning, the way a quiet moment can open your chest and soften your pace. These things fade, but before they do, they can be felt deeply. When you carry this awareness, you become more generous with your time, not in giving it away, but in how you inhabit it. You listen more, you let go of petty grievances. You stop performing and start participating. You realize that saying goodbye isn't always a dramatic exit. Sometimes it's just the last time, and you don't know it yet. So you let the moment be whole. You let it count. And not just with others. With yourself, too. You stop putting off the life you mean to live. You stop waiting for permission to change. You stop hiding your gratitude, your creativity, your real voice behind layers of delay. Because if today were the last, you wouldn't want it wasted in distraction. You'd want it real. And maybe that's the point. Not to fear the end, but to let it guide you. To let it teach you that the only thing you truly own is how you show up. And how you show up again and again is the shape your life takes. So treat the day like it matters. Because it does. How much time have you wasted? The cost of distraction and the courage to begin again. Most people don't run out of time. They give it away. 1 minute at a time. One habit at a time. One unconscious yes at a time. They don't lose their life in a single event. They leak it slowly into distraction, avoidance, and routines that no longer serve them. The Stoics asked hard questions, not to shame, but to awaken. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." He wasn't scolding. He was pointing to the quiet tragedy of not noticing how precious time really is. Think of all the hours lost to aimless scrolling, rehearsed arguments, performative living. How many moments were passed not in living, but in waiting for something better, something easier, something more impressive to come along. And all the while, life was happening, quietly, softly, in the background. Time is not an unlimited resource. Every hour is a payment. And the question is, what are you buying with yours? It's easy to believe that the real part of life is still ahead, that the meaningful parts haven't started yet. But the truth is, meaning doesn't arrive. It's made in how you listen, in how you move, in how you choose to treat the most ordinary parts of your day. The Stoics didn't fear time running out. They feared not using it. They feared becoming strangers to themselves. They feared reaching the end having only performed a life, never really having lived it. So they kept score. Not with perfection, but with honesty. Where did I spend my time today? Was I present, or just busy? Did I act from my values, or just react to convenience? These are hard questions, but they're questions that give you your life back. Because the moment you ask them, you remember you still have a choice. You can stop drifting. You can begin again, right now. Forgiveness isn't just for others. You can forgive yourself for the hours lost, for the seasons dulled by distraction, for the time spent asleep to your own potential. And then without drama, you can begin to use your time differently. Not in panic, but in presence. Not with guilt, but with gratitude. Because every time you wake up to how brief this is, you see it more clearly. This moment matters. This is your time. And no one else gets to decide how it's lived. The urgency of mortality, turning the fear of death into the fuel for life. Most people keep death in the background. A distant concept. A vague future event. Something that happens to other people, someday, far from now. But the Stoics brought it closer. They sat with it, spoke to it, carried it, like a compass in their pocket. Not to depress themselves, but to live more urgently, more honestly, more awake. Because when you stop pretending you have unlimited time, your life begins to sharpen. You speak more directly. You hesitate less. You stop saving your courage for another day that may never come. The urgency of mortality is not about panic. It's about priority. It's about finally seeing that the window is small and the light is fading, and everything you've been waiting to do depends on your willingness to begin now. Seneca said, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." He was pointing at the strange contradiction in how we live. We fear death, but we delay life. We act as if there will always be more time. We waste today as if tomorrow is guaranteed. But when death becomes real, not theoretical, it changes everything. It changes how you listen to people, how you sit with yourself, how you show up for the things that matter and walk away from the things that don't. You realize how fragile everything is, and how rare. You realize that each encounter could be the last, and that every day not spent in alignment is a day lost to illusion. The Stoics practiced this urgency without anxiety. They didn't rush. They didn't scramble. But they also didn't sleepwalk. They met the day with respect, with discipline, with the quiet fire of someone who knows the clock is ticking. Because it is. When you remember you will die, you start to live like you're meant to. You stop playing roles and start telling the truth. You stop waiting for things to be easy and start doing what's necessary. The urgency of mortality doesn't make life darker. It makes it deeper. You begin to hold joy more tightly. You cry more easily, but more fully. You say what you mean while you still have the voice to say it. And if there's a fear in that, it's a sacred kind of fear. A fear that wakes you up. Because the end is coming. Quietly, invisibly, inevitably. And between now and then is your one chance to live in a way that matters. You could leave life right now. The wisdom of carrying finality with you. At any moment, life can end. Not in theory, in truth. You could be walking home, sitting in a chair, talking to someone you love, and it could all be over. The Stoics didn't say this to scare you. They said it to free you. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." These weren't dramatic words. They were instructions. A reminder to strip away what doesn't matter. To stop waiting for closure, for permission, for the perfect conditions. Because this is it. This is your life, and it's not a rehearsal. Most people don't live like this. They live like they have time to waste, time to be angry, time to be resentful, time to procrastinate their purpose and bury their desires beneath routine. But the Stoics knew that kind of delay is dangerous, because one day the delay becomes permanent. To carry finality with you is to walk into each moment with your eyes open. You don't assume there will be another. You don't treat your conversations like warm-ups. You don't let pettiness steal your peace. This kind of awareness doesn't make you fragile. It makes you bold. You stop shrinking to fit expectations. You say what needs to be said. You forgive, because holding the grudge costs more than it's worth. You stop rehearsing your regrets and start creating something worth remembering. Knowing you could leave life at any time sharpens your love. You cherish the people in front of you. You let their imperfections soften instead of irritate. You learn to listen not for response, but for presence, because there may not be another chance to hear them. And it sharpens your decisions. You stop building a life you don't want to live. You say no more often. You say yes more bravely. You stop waiting to be ready. You realize that hesitation can be more dangerous than failure. When you live with mortality close, you become more alive. You become someone who walks with gravity, but not heaviness. Someone who speaks with depth, but not despair. Because every moment you remember you could leave life right now, you return to what's real, and in that return you begin to write a story, not of perfection, but of presence, A story that won't need to be long to be full. Immortality through character, the only legacy you truly control. The Stoics didn't believe in chasing fame. They saw how quickly names are forgotten, how monuments crumble, how history edits and erases. But they believed in something deeper: character, the only kind of immortality that matters. Character lives in the impact you have on the people around you, in how your presence lingers after you're gone. Not in stone, or titles, or echoes of applause, but in memory, in impression, in how others choose to carry themselves because of how you carried yourself. Seneca reminded us, a good character, when established, is not easily overthrown. And in that time, what matters isn't how loudly you lived, but how truly, how honestly, how much of your life was aligned with your values rather than your fears. You may never be remembered by name, but you will be remembered by feeling, by energy, by the quiet gravity of how you moved through the world. Were you kind when it was hard, steady when others wavered, honest when truth was uncomfortable? That is the shape of your immortality. The Stoics didn't measure greatness by status. They measured it by virtue, by courage, by clarity. And character to them wasn't a performance, it was practice. It was built in silence, in small choices, in private integrity. You don't control how the world remembers you, but you control what you offer to it. You control the effort, the consistency, the discipline to live a life that is rooted in truth, even when no one is watching. And that's the irony. When you stop trying to be remembered, you often are. Not because you aim to leave a legacy, but because you lived one. You became someone whose words outlasted your voice, whose example outlived your presence. Character is the soul's footprint, and you leave it every day. Not by seeking immortality, but by living honorably in the face of impermanence, by choosing the good even when it's quiet, by doing the right thing even when it's hard, by letting your life become a quiet offering, not to be celebrated, but to be trusted. Because the truth is, legacy isn't written in what people say about you. It's written in who they become after knowing you. The meaning isn't out there, building purpose from the inside out. People search for meaning in big things, in signs, in moments of revelation. They look for it in careers, in status, in romance, in recognition. They chase it across countries, decades, philosophies, expecting it to appear like a spotlight from the sky. But the Stoics didn't believe meaning was something you found. They believed it was something you made. Not once in some dramatic epiphany, but daily, quietly, through intention. Epictetus said, "No great thing is created suddenly. Meaning isn't the result of what happens to you. It's the result of how you respond, of how you show up to the life you already have, slowly, consistently, with intention." The modern world sells the idea that purpose must be rare, complicated, and tied to something larger than yourself. But the Stoic path says otherwise. It says you can create purpose in how you do ordinary things, how you speak to someone tired, how you care for your work, even when it feels small, how you take responsibility when it would be easier to shift blame. Meaning is not buried in distant dreams. It's built in presence, in consistency, in values that endure even when no one else is watching. If you're always waiting for your life to become meaningful, you may miss the fact that it already is, that it becomes more so every time you act from integrity, every time you choose patience over reaction, every time you move with quiet dignity, even when nothing around you is encouraging it. The Stoics didn't romanticize life. They stripped it down. They saw it for what it was: brief, unpredictable, fragile. And they made that their reason to live well, not someday, but now. You don't need to search for your path. You need to walk it. You don't need a grand narrative to matter. You need a clear intention, a way of being that holds steady regardless of circumstance. Because meaning isn't something out there waiting to be found. It's something you carry inside. And the more you live by it, the less you need the world to tell you who you are. Living as if already dead. Letting go of the fear that shrinks life. What would change if you truly believed you were already dead? If every breath from this moment on was a bonus, a gift, not a guarantee? The Stoics didn't ask this to flirt with morbidity. They asked it to strip away illusion, to unshackle the mind from the fear that prevents real living. To live as if already dead is not to despair, it's to be free. Free from hesitation. Free from pretending you'll always have more time. Free from the paralysis of waiting for the perfect day to begin. Seneca reminded himself constantly that death was not in the future, but always beside him. Every passing moment is a moment of life you've already died to, and what remains is smaller than you think, but also more precious. This mindset changes how you choose. You stop deferring meaning. You stop clinging to comfort. You stop needing every decision to be safe, because you realize that safety is an illusion and time is a vanishing currency. When you live as if already dead, your priorities shift. You don't fear discomfort. You engage with it. You don't fear failure. You learn from it. You don't chase endless validation. You become curious about what really matters when nothing else is left. This is not about recklessness. It's about clarity. It's about remembering that your legacy isn't built in the future. It's written in the small moments of today. In the discipline to act when no one is watching. In the courage to speak when silence feels safer. In the grace to let go when holding on has become a prison. Living as if already dead means you stop measuring your days by how much you accumulated or achieved. You measure them by how fully you showed up, how clearly you saw, how deeply you connected. And yes, this kind of life takes effort. It takes practice, but it also brings peace. Because when death is no longer something you avoid thinking about, it becomes something that sharpens your attention. You stop sleeping through your hours. You wake up. And the world around you, the people, the tasks, the ordinary rhythms begin to glow with a strange kind of urgency. Not because they last forever, but because they don't. To live as if already dead is not to give up. It's to finally begin. Gratitude as preparation for death, leaving nothing unnoticed. Gratitude is often treated like an accessory, something you express when life goes well. But the Stoics saw it as something much deeper. They saw it as a foundation, a form of readiness. A way to meet death, not with panic, but with peace. To be grateful is to live as if you've already been given enough. It's to look around and recognize that nothing was owed to you, not your breath, not your relationships, not the quiet moments between storms. And in that recognition, you become less desperate to hold on, less frantic to consume, less afraid of what might be taken away. Seneca wrote, "He who receives a benefit with gratitude repays the first installment on his debt." And perhaps that's what life is, a gift you're slowly repaying, not by accumulating more, but by noticing more. Gratitude shifts how you carry your days. You stop rushing through them. You pay attention to the warmth in a voice, the rhythm of your breath, the presence of someone sitting quietly beside you. These things aren't small, they're sacred, but most of the time, they pass without acknowledgement. The practice of gratitude in the Stoic sense isn't just about listing what's good. It's about waking up to what's always been there. It's about realizing that the moments you once called ordinary were already extraordinary, if only you had been more present. And when you practice this consistently, you begin to prepare for death without fear, because you've lived, not just existed, not just planned or strived or performed, but actually lived, with your eyes open, with your heart engaged. This doesn't mean you won't grieve when things end. It doesn't mean loss won't hurt, but it means that what you loved wasn't wasted, that you were awake to it, that you absorbed its fullness while you had the chance. To prepare for death with gratitude is to leave nothing unacknowledged. No kindness unspoken, no sunrise unseen, no embrace taken for granted. It's to look back, not with regret for what you didn't get, but with reverence for what you did. And in doing so, you free yourself. You free others. You begin to see that the meaning of life was never in how long it lasted, but in how deeply it was received. Gratitude becomes your readiness, your release, your final thank you. And when that time comes, you won't need more time to say what mattered. You'll have already said it simply by how you lived. What will your soul leave behind? The imprint that outlives the body. One day, your voice will go silent. Your footsteps will stop. The things you owned will pass to others or disappear altogether. But something will remain. Not your name, not your record, not your resume. Something quieter, deeper. What you leave behind isn't what people can touch, it's how they were touched by you. The Stoics didn't talk about legacy in terms of greatness. They didn't obsess over being remembered. They knew how quickly time erases, but they spoke often about the soul, the part of you that lives in how you live, in the choices you make, in the habits that shape you. Seneca said, "Live among men as if God beheld you. Speak to God as if men were listening, because when all is said and done, your character is your only enduring creation. Your soul leaves behind echoes in how people speak because you spoke gently, in how they forgive more easily because you forgave them, in how they choose patience or honesty or courage because something in your presence reminded them it was possible." You don't need to be extraordinary to leave something sacred behind. You just need to live honestly, to carry your values, even when no one affirms them, to leave each moment more whole than you found it. Your soul is not your status. It's not your role. It's how you love, how you show up when it's hard, how you keep your word when no one is watching, how you respond to pain, not just your own, but someone else's. These things live longer than you do. They shape others quietly, from the inside, and they ripple outward in ways you'll never measure. So ask yourself, what will you leave behind when the world no longer sees you? Will it be bitterness or gentleness, control or freedom, fear or truth? Will it be the memory of someone who needed to be right or someone who tried to be good? The Stoics believed that your life is your message, not your words, not your beliefs, but your behavior. And your soul is not what you say you are. It's what you practice when life gets heavy. That's what will last. And when you're gone, what you did quietly will speak the loudest. Let it say something worth hearing. Let it be the kind of echo the world is better for carrying. In a world that often demands noise, we've spent these hours in quiet reflection, exploring what it means to live with strength, clarity, and intention. If something in these words stayed with you, or stirred something deeper, you're not alone. These aren't just ideas. They're practices, and you carry them forward, quietly, steadily, in your own way. If this journey meant something to you, feel free to share it. Leave a comment with the thoughts or insights that stayed with you. Like the video if it helped you breathe a little deeper. And if you'd like more spaces like this, subscribe, there's more to come. Thank you for being here. Keep walking the path, quietly, boldly, one step at a time.